So first of all, like, what's your job title and your remit?
I'm the technical director of the Performance Institute in Shanghai.
The UFC Academy is a group of athletes that we've recruited from all over China.
The MMA scene in China is smaller than the MMA scene in the UK.
Is it really?
Each weight division, checked how many people there were. There's more in the UK than there are in China. You can coach anyone to be technical, okay? That's the easiest part. My model for MMA preparation, I call it the FMA model, which is the fighter, martial artist and athlete. The fighter being the psychological side, martial artist being the technical, tactical, and then the athlete being the physical or genetic aspects. I create a Venn diagram of those three things.
Okay.
And it's about where you sit within them.
Yeah.
I think if you think of the greatest, George St. Pierre, athletic freak, Khabib, everyone that talks about him says how physically strong he is, weaponizes conditioning, the pace he's able to put. John Jones, if you score him and those three attributes in fights that have been very close, always come up trumps. So all those three attributes, you're giving him 10 out of 10 on all of them, really.
Right.
And I think the best guys, goats, are like that.
$1 million question that we all want to know is, are our athletes, are they faster, stronger, more powerful, better specimens than any other sport out there? So fresh off of the Road to UFC final Sunday morning before you travel home, I'm really pleased I managed to get you for a few hours. We've had some really interesting conversations over the years about the setup that you've got at the PI, but there's so much more to your story, Dean, which I think the listeners would be very interested in hearing. But a quick reaction last night, because we had the finals of season 2.
Yeah.
Road to UFC, you had a strong Chinese presence as well. Are you allowed to have favourites on the road to UFC? You obviously know the guys from China.
Yeah, I mean, with the Chinese guys, it's kind of expected that we're training them, we're preparing them for the tournament. That's kind of the whole. It's like the pathway for the academy guys for them to get to the UFC. That's basically what the road to UFC was developed for. And so yeah, of course, we definitely got our favourites there. But when we in the featherweight division, we had a pleasant challenge of having two Chinese guys fighting each other, which we had to sort of work around. But certainly in that one there was no favourites, and it was a win-win for Chinese MMA, win-win for the PI, and we just sort of one of those let the best man win type thing.
Yeah, that Rongzhu is some athlete.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, he's incredible.
So those that don't know about Rongzhu, he was 21 when he got signed
20.
to the 20
Yeah.
when he got signed. Was he the youngest guy on the roster?
Yeah.
Like, he's had a career in the UFC already.
Yeah,
he's just come back. He won last night.
Yeah,
I mean, looked good.
And obviously there are some guys that have come into the in fact the Chinese fight, Song Yudong. So I think Song Yudong signed excuse me, at 19, I think.
Right.
And so there are a couple of guys that have had successful careers doing that, but for whatever reason, it's not just the skills or the physical attributes that you need. You obviously have to have the mental side, and he was just like too immature to go to the UFC at that time. Something we weren't aware of, because living in China, he was doing really well. But then when he moved to America, because once they get into the academy, once they get into the UFC, we no longer coach them.
Right.
Our journey is or sort of remit is to develop them before the UFC, get them into the UFC. And so once he was signed, and he went to living in Miami or wherever ATT is, 20-year-old kid effectively, never been out of China, living in a completely different culture and environment, having just way too much fun. He missed weight twice out of 3 fights, which is just that kind of tells you a picture of where he was professionally and sort of with his mindset. And he just didn't realise what the opportunity he had, because I saw him actually after he got cut, maybe like a week after, and we were training together, and he was devastated, and he was just too immature to even realise the opportunity he had in front of him, and thought, it's going to be all right, and he can just make it off, because he was fighting, I think, pro from like 16.
So crazy.
And so he's had so many fights, so confident, and beaten full grown men, and I think he felt that going to the UFC, he's still going to be able to do that and not train as he should, and just maybe went to his head a little bit. And then he really learnt from it, and like last year in 2023 he had the highest attendance of any athlete in the academy.
Right.
And when we had this break for the final, as you know, the Shanghai event was was cancelled, we gave them some time off to because they were basically peaking in that fight camp. So we needed to give them some time off to make sure they're not overtrained by the time we came around to the final last night. And the other guys went home, but he decided to stay in Shanghai. We dropped his like training load down, but he wanted to be around, and he's like, he's just, you can see the difference in
pulled his socks
out.
out.
It's been incredible. I'm really proud of him in terms of the shift that he's made, and I think he has the ability to have the sort of career that Song Yudong has had. I think he can get to the rankings, and I think he's got that level of talent. The first day we had the combine, the first day we saw him when the PI opened, he was like the standout guy from day one.
Right.
And at that time he was 18 or 19.
Right.
So he's always been that sort of that special athlete or special fighter, and now we're starting to see him sort of step into that potential.
That's wonderful. 5 years you've been with him. That's really cool. All right, well, let's talking of turning back the clock and young men then, shall we? So whereabouts in the UK are you from, and how the hell did you get involved in mixed martial arts?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so I'm from Windsor, England, which is like west of London.
It's where the Queen's at, where she was.
Where she was, yeah. And my uncle taught kickboxing, and so I started when I was like 4 years old. I have a brother who's 4 years older than me, and so he was already doing it, and I was there just watching and not too young to do it, but desperate to get involved because my brother was doing it and my uncle was teaching it.
How many brothers have you got?
I've got two.
Okay,
so
I was going to say
Adam's
right.
He's
not older than you.
No. He's 10 years younger than me.
Right. Okay.
But then there's my older brother who was also a really good kickboxer, like national level kickboxer, but didn't want to make a career of it. But he was 4 years older than me, so I really wanted to get involved, and I was desperate to do it. It was the type of kickboxing where it was I guess the type that I actually forget the official name for it, but there's no low kicks. It's like the type
everything above the waist.
Yeah, that type of kickboxing. And so I've been involved in martial arts, since that sort of age, but I also played rugby, to a decent level through when I was a teenager, and then one of my coaches suggested trying wrestling, and then using wrestling as like a way to improve my tackling technique and being better in contact, and he believed in that, and that I'll come back to that later about my work in rugby, and I've kind of gone full circle with that. Right. So I started wrestling at like 12 and fell in love with that, and that's definitely been the martial art that I've I most enjoyed and had a greatest affinity to, and then when I got to like 18, I was hoping to be a professional rugby player, and I played at like academy level, but wasn't quite good enough, if I'm completely honest. And then
hard in the UK though.
Yeah, it's like
I went to school with Josh Lucy.
Oh no way.
Yeah, he was in the year above me, and Ed Lucy. So Josh played for England. Ed played for like under-19s Wales.
Right.
Really bizarre. One parent as well.
Yeah.
So I've been around those guys, and
super competitive.
Oh,
and it's a great infrastructure for developing talent. So I went to university. And then at university I went to Nottingham University,
right?
And then I was just training in a gym, because I still obviously I wasn't necessarily doing that much rugby then, but I enjoyed weights and lifting weight. And then Paul Daly was in there, hitting a bag, and I just went up to him and said, what you doing training, and can I get involved, sort of thing. And he was like, oh yeah, come down and train. We train on this day, and I was like, okay, wicked. Went down, and that was where like Bisping was. Dan Hardy.
Was this Rough House, or was
this is pre-Rough House?
Pre-Rough House.
This is 2003.
Right.
Pre-Rough House, before Rough House was formed, but and Bisping was training in Nottingham with I think a guy called Paul Davis.
Right.
This is before Wolfslayer was formed as well. And then we were literally training. I spoke about it with Mike, and when I think about how far the sport has come in I guess 21 years. And what the Performance Institute is like. You've seen the one in Vegas, and you see the facilities that are there, and the staff that's involved. We were training in a community centre where we only had like 4 mats, or maybe in 2 judo mats, and one group could grapple, and then the other groups would be doing stand up, and we'd like rotate because there wasn't enough mats for everyone to grapple at the same time. But at that time, I think like Mike was fighting in Cage Warriors. He might even have been
the light heavyweight
champion, possibly,
right.
Yeah, and that was the type of training that was good. But he was just, he's always been he's a natural fighter, and I think that doesn't matter what the preparation he would have done, he was going to, at that level, the competition he would have definitely, and he dominated. And then after that, Mike left Nottingham, and then Raphael's kind of, I think that's basically when Raphael started, and we had another place to train, and that's when like Jimmy Waller joined, Andre Winner, Ross Pearson, and then that's kind of the timeline of me getting involved in MMA. And at that point, I wasn't thinking about having a career in it, but then I went to Brazil for like 4.5 months in a gap between my second and third year at university. That was my first introduction to BJJ.
Were you there? Did you just want to go to Brazil?
I wanted to learn jiu-jitsu.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and so
But where was your career facing at this point? So what were you? I didn't ask. What were you reading at university?
Nutritional biochemistry.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So where did you think your career was going to take you?
I thought I was going to be a doctor.
Right. Okay.
So I was going to go to probably postgraduate medicine was the plan after that.
Okay.
So and then.
So this is just hobby stuff, really.
Well, yeah, and I enjoyed it. Enjoyed it, and I was like, because my wrestling was good, they liked having me as a training partner.
Right.
And so I was training with these guys, and I'd be like, I'm doing all right. Like they like training with me, and I was thinking, you know, and I would have liked to. I've always wanted to be a professional athlete, and I, you know, it's something that I wanted to do. It's just at that stage when you're in the early stages of it, it's like hard to visualize or believe that you could actually possibly have a career in the sport, and especially where it was
where
then.
the sport was at.
Yeah, so it's like, you know, what on one side I've got you know, the possibilities of being a doctor. I wanted to be a surgeon, and you know, that sort of structured, not easy, but like laid out pathway. Or
your family will end up, you'll have kids in private schools.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's going to be a very nice life.
Or the unpredictable stage of, and maybe it's a sign to how crazy I am that I chose the latter. But yeah, I was in the mindset, and my parents were like super supportive of it at the time. And
Really?
Yeah, well, because the way obviously they wanted that, but at the same time they could see the passion and how much I was training and my approach to it, and you know, you're only young once, and you only have that opportunity. Well, I could go for it. If it doesn't work out, well, I could go to university. You know, I could do the postgraduate medicine.
Do you think it helped that your uncle had been
100%.
And
he was still very supportive at that time.
Okay.
And he, you know, he was a huge part in my decision and across my whole career, and yeah, he played a big role in that.
Because I don't, just to give perspective, I still don't think most of the population understand what we do in the UK.
No,
but
it's
back
definitely
then,
getting better though.
Oh, it's getting better.
Because I no longer have a conversation when I speak to people about what the UFC is.
Right.
Whereas back then, I'd literally have to explain, you know, it's a combination of the Olympic combat sports.
Yeah.
You know, you can't bite, blah, 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 blah. I don't have that conversation anymore. It's more like I work for the UFC, and they're like, oh, that's cool, Conor McGregor. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, there's a few connections.
Yeah, and they kind of know, and on the even people who are not involved in the sport, and that I've definitely noticed that I no longer have to explain what the sport is.
Yeah.
Whereas back then I did, and then so yeah, I went to Brazil, and I competed in at that time it was the Copa do Mundo, which is like the Mundials effectively, because I was a white belt, and I won that, and I think I was like one of the first English people. I know it's only at that level.
Was it no gi?
No, in the gi.
Oh, you did it in the gi?
Yeah.
At that time,
at that time, I was training in the gi. I thought that was the sort of route to go.
Right.
And I was at Ricardo Vieira's gym in Rio, and then Caprido was there, and then there was I went to the Mundials camp to train with them because everyone was preparing. That was Team Braza at the time, and normally like white belts don't train with the black belts, but because I was like a decent wrestler, I would like train with them. So I was training with like Andre Galvao, Damian Maia, Caprido, all these guys, and I didn't even know, and I'm now like really good friends with like Robert Drysdale. I've stayed in touch with him. But at the time, you know, that was just before he'd beat Marcelo Garcia. He was at the peak of his career really. And when he beat him at ADCC, but he won the Mundials that year. Andre Galvao was his first year at black belt, and like Alan Finfu, who you might know.
Yeah, of course,
he was a brown belt.
He's a legend.
Yeah, and we're still friends, obviously from that time, because he was at that gym with me at the time, and so and Claudio Silva was there, purple belt.
Really?
Yeah.
The Hannibal.
Yeah,
Hannibal. Yeah.
So you know, all those guys, and I was training with them, and then. You know, and I'm still friends with them now, but it was like it was a weird experience for me to be training with those guys at that level. I would only do stand up with them. I wouldn't necessarily roll with them because then it wouldn't be worth it. But sometimes the stand up rounds, I'd get involved because of my wrestling. And so when I came back from that, I was like, I think there might be something here. So, and it was confident from winning that. I know it wasn't, it's not winning at black belt, but it's still in such a short period. That was literally my first start in jiu-jitsu. So when I got to Brazil, was the first time I ever actually rolled. I'd never done jiu-jitsu before that, and then 3 and a bit months later, I'd won that tournament.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so I was like, I need to, and then I fell in love with jiu-jitsu at that point, and was training and helping those guys getting ready for fights. I think Dan was already in Cage Warriors by that point. I'm not sure where Paul was fighting, but Dan was on that sort of run of going up to his first title. And then when I graduated from university, I was like, now it's like now or never. I was absolutely had the bug for it. I was, passionate about it. Enjoyed training with the guys. Everything that comes with training in an MMA gym. And I thought, why not? And so I went for it. And then and then I went on my pro career. Went on Ultimate Fighter and all that stuff. And then I'm basically here.
Yeah,
yeah.
That's mad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just that, have you read the book Outliers?
No.
It's a fantastic book, and they talk about, for example, I think the National Hockey League, there's no one that's born, or very few people are born after February, because
I've heard about that stat though.
Yeah, physically you're bigger,
yeah,
so then you'll get the attention when you're younger.
You get the extra coaching and
and Bill Gates grew up in the only state in America where they had a certain programmable computer system, so he got time programming in the state library. So if he'd have been in another state, we might not have had what we have here. If you hadn't have gone to Nottingham,
and just bumped into Paul Daly in the gym,
literally the cream of the crop of UK MMA.
I always mention those guys because it was pretty insane that we had who we had as training partners there.
Yeah,
and we were all welterweight or lightweight.
That's a good point.
So we were all able to train together.
Apart from Bisping.
No, well, yeah. So I mean Roughhouse.
Yes, sure.
As Roughhouse, and this is another thing I talked about with Mike. From the generation that I am in MMA, I didn't have any MMA coaches. No one had fought MMA who coached me.
Right.
Because the sport's just not old enough.
I was going to ask you that, because I my coach talks about taking stills of a VHS that he'd have to visit in London to get. So how were you guys putting it together?
Well, that's what I was doing. That was a lot of what I was, even from that sort of time. I'd corner the guys, all of them through that time. We didn't necessarily have an MMA coach, but I was just falling into that position. And I used to love watching instructional videos, like the Eric Paulson one.
Just spoke with Eric Paulson.
Josh. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Right, his knowledge is. I've been to a couple of his seminars. He's the savant. And then I remember Frank Shamrock's instructional was really good. That was the first time I'd seen punches into takedowns and how he thought about setting up punches, and I was like, oh, okay, this is what we need to be doing. And then I just off of those videos and instructionals, I just started piecing things together from the jiu-jitsu and the wrestling stuff and seeing how they fit together. I was understanding that the transitions between the different martial arts is where the sport is, and the people that can seamlessly go between them is who are the best guys can do that. So that's how I was thinking and trying to put stuff together. And we were just, for the most part, if I'm honest, we just got together and sparred. And when you have that many good guys, you're obviously going to get better. It's quite a unique environment. And we all had different skill sets, different styles. Definitely Roughhouse is more of a striking dominant team. So that helped me in terms of the one, improving my striking, but then going up against people that I was never going to fight people that had as good striking as Paul Daly or
you could slow them down.
Yeah. And so it would help me prepare for my fights, knowing that if I can get those guys down, then maybe I'll be able to do it to other people, sort of thing.
I've got to ask you then. I've obviously been lucky enough to spend a lot of time with Dan Hardy, and I would have heard about Roughhouse through his lens. But I've got to ask you about the Roughhouse, because as a guy that was growing up in the scene long after you guys, but I remember some of our guys going over to various different gyms, like Denison Sutherland's one of my first coaches, and he would go out to these Roughhouse or down to Wolf's Lair, and he'd come back to the gym like, what's it like? What are they like? What's the level? This kind of thing. But you were right there in the epicenter, so give us an idea of what those days were like at the Rough House. Was it as bad as we all heard it was? Because you guys had a reputation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it wasn't like dangerous. I think there's some gyms where like you hear about some real bad stuff going on. We sparred hard. We knew we were going into hard sparring.
Yeah,
because like everyone, it's a level playing field in that terms, and you know what you're getting yourself into, sort of thing. And it wasn't nothing about it was malicious. And if someone was hurt, we would, although the odd time if I'd been knocked down a couple of times, I just kind of take a round out and come back in. And now, knowing what I know now, I wish I'd never done that. But
right.
But in terms of how the sparring went, I think it was like a really good level, and we, the proof is in the pudding in terms of the careers that those guys had, and some of the wins. UFC, I think 105. We had 5 wins on a fight card. I'm not sure like anyone's done that.
Wow.
I don't know. I could be lying there. I could be wrong. That could be fake news.
SBG in 2014 had it, and I think but back then,
really? Okay.
they had this mad run, didn't they?
In one night.
Cahill. I'm gonna after yesterday.
I don't know.
But there was
anyway,
regardless,
it's not a common thing, right?
No, it's not.
And so it's definitely, we're very fortunate, especially at the time. Now you think about, there's lots of gyms that have like lots of UFC fighters in them, or high level guys.
Yeah.
But you got to view it in the lens of 2004, 5, 6, where the sport wasn't as developed, and then every day we got these guys on the mats, and then because we had that name, and those guys had, particularly obviously Paul and Dan, people would come and train with us. And we were also getting like people coming in and visiting, and Leon Edwards would come. I remember Leon Edwards coming up when he was like 18 years old, training with us, and even back then he was a handful,
right?
And having all people like that come in, and Brendan Lockname would come as well, and there's lots of different people that would travel in, knowing that they're getting good rounds, good sparring, and it was a good environment. When it was tough. You better have your wits about you. Better come in serious. It's fun and games before, and the banter on the mats are the best. But when the bell goes, it was pretty serious. Yeah,
of course. That a lot of those guys disperse. Then, well, actually, let's talk about Tough, because it's such a unique experience, right? How was that overall experience for you?
I mean, I've got to thank it. I didn't win it or anything, but I've got to thank Tough for the role it played in my career, just in terms of the opportunities that it presented. Like at the time when I came out of Tough, I was only like I think 5-1, but the sponsorship opportunities and things like that were able to allow me to train full time and stuff like that. I would never.
So you weren't full time going in, but then you were coming out.
Coming out, yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah. Okay. Cool.
And so just in terms of that, and then the notoriety and the opportunities that maybe came from it after that was, I'm eternally grateful for it, and just the experience of it. It's really challenging living in that house though, in terms of the actual the show. There's no music, no books, no TV, and you're in a house with your potential opponents.
Yeah.
And you're training hard, and that your fight's coming up, and fighters, any fighter knows in those moments in the lead up to a fight, there's a lot that's going on in your head.
Yeah.
And then being in that environment, that close to someone day in day out, it's an uncomfortable situation. But having said that, I really enjoyed it, and we were fortunate because the UK MMA scene is so small that we knew we were basically a proper team. Ross, Andre, and I were on the same team, so we knew each other really well. I knew Jeff Lawson. I'd known him from like a couple of shows. I'd fought Dave Faulkner. I knew Nico Shipshak as well from the scene. We weren't friends at the time, but I knew who he was, sort of thing. And then Martin Stapleton might have been the only one that I didn't actually know beforehand, but then ended up being really good mates with him. He's a top bloke. And so we were like a proper team, so we had each other as friends and stuff. But it's still just, when you have your normal routine, that however you live, and then going to that environment where you've got cameras on you all the time, and it's an intense environment, and the people that do well in it are the people that are definitely mentally strong. And I identified like weaknesses in my sort of focus, and I guess the sort of mental performance side of things. Afterwards, coming out of that, knowing how much it affected me, I knew that it's something that I needed to work on, because I was so like out of whack and unsettled in that environment.
How long were you fighting pro after coming out of Tough?
maybe another 4 years. 5.
Was there 4 years
Yeah,
after?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think I remember. Was it Macto? Was that your last
that's
fight?
my last fight. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was there for that.
Yeah.
You fought a teammate of mine, Shah Hussain.
Yes. And then Bama. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you were still doing your coaching thing. So I guess the Rough House, there was a period where everyone was going off in different directions, right? Like internationally. Dan Vegas,
Dan lived
Ross,
in Vegas,
Australia.
And Ross wasn't quite in Australia at that point. I was like fully coaching when he moved to Australia. I wasn't fighting at that point, I think. But yeah, definitely it wasn't as when we were talking like 2014, we definitely weren't as tight a group. Not just because people had moved away. Nico Shipchak had retired. Ross was maybe like doing a lot of his camps at Alliance.
That's right. Of course.
More Alliance at that time, and just getting the even higher level training partners, I guess, with who they had there, and that's at that time. Looking back on it, I was coaching at the same time as I was,
which is so tough.
Yeah, and it was just with my coach's mind on, if I was coaching someone that was doing that, I'd be like, mate, what are you doing? Like, are you serious about fighting or not? But at the time, I was like, no, I can do it, and I loved coaching. There was a night on Bama, I was cornering 2 people, and the night that I fought.
That's wild, yeah.
But
that's UK MMA, isn't it?
Wild is a polite way to say it. It's just that's not the environment that's conducive to you being in the right mindset for what you have to. Yeah. So and then I had before I had that Macto fight, I had a loss on KSW, which it was 2 years in between that and my last fight. So I thought I was probably going to retire at that point because I just wasn't training properly. I was coaching people and I was already making that transition. And then I broke up with my ex-wife at that point after that KSW fight, and I was just back training again, and I was enjoying training, and I was like, I think I can do it again, and I did, and I had that win, and it was it was really good. But then I had a car crash, and I had a back injury from that car crash, and it was at that time I'm like, it's going to take so long to get back, and I was already I don't know how old I was. I guess I was just over 30, and I just thought, I don't know, I just felt like it was done. It was like a message or something. I thought like, right. And the time it was going to put me back, I wanted to have like a nice run from that point. And I knew that I wanted to focus 100% on coaching. And as soon as I did, my coaching really like took off. Yeah. And I developed as a coach, and the opportunities came that like working with Bisping in his last couple of fights, and then obviously getting this job with the UFC. So I definitely made the right decision in going full time at coaching at that point, I think.
Yeah. So what was the team that you were coaching? It was because there was certainly a team around Windsor from memory.
From Windsor, which was my gym, which is no longer going because I'm not there.
Yeah.
But then we had obviously my brother. And there was a few different guys.
A guy called Ed.
Yes, Ed Arthur.
So Ed I used to train under Dennis and Son and Hemmel. Yeah. And I remember Ed coming up. Yeah. And then he moved over, because we're not a million miles away down in Watford. So they were sort of rival teams in a way, but not in the nicest possible way. Yeah. But they're definitely crossover there. So I remember him coming over to you guys and doing really well. Like, he had a good little career.
Yeah, I mean, he's one that like I almost get upset thinking about, because I feel like the level that he could have gone to, it's really, I mean, obviously it's his choice to stop fighting at the time that he stopped, but I believe he could have had a really good UFC career. He lost a decision to Peter Yan in his last fight before.
He was doing ACA, wasn't he? So,
which was tough against those, but you needed those, I guess you got to, in hindsight, maybe I'm too much of a, I don't know if purist is the word to use, but I was like, if you can't beat these guys, then you don't deserve to be in the UFC anyway. That's kind of, I'd rather someone take a tougher route and get to the UFC than take an easy route with a padded record, get to the UFC, 100%. Have 2 fights, and they're out. Yeah. And like, what's the point in that? Just so you can say you got to the UFC. It's like a couple
seminars. On the back of it.
I'd like, I really genuinely, he has a win over the prospect.
Nathaniel
Wood.
Did he ever win over Nathaniel Wood?
He stopped Nathaniel Wood.
Was I at that fight? Yeah. God bless him.
Cameron Else, he stopped.
Did he?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He's got some good wins.
He's got some good wins on the way up, and
he was tough,
and his
man.
fighting style, like he had like a Conor like level confidence in the way that he approached stuff, and swagger, and he was intense, and his conditioning was incredible. He was well rounded, good chin. You know, and I know obviously Peter Yan won that fight, but that was a good fight.
Peter Yan as
it was
well.
Peter Yan, do you know what I mean? And yeah, it took him on a different direction that maybe made him feel that that wasn't the path for him. But for me as a coach, he was the one for me that I thought that was gonna, you know, get into the UFC, go to the rankings, and have a really like good career. And you know, I was wrong on that one, but. Yeah, we had some amazing times though, traveling around and fighting and stuff, and he's still a good friend of mine. And but yeah, he was really good. But the one that got away,
the dude that got away.
Yeah.
Oh, nice one. Oh yeah, I sometimes we still stumble across each other on the socials and stuff, but I don't live a million miles away from him. But
yeah, he's big into jiu-jitsu now. I think he's just got his brown belt,
right?
And he I don't think he appreciates the punches in the head, which I can completely understand. Like, I don't like to spar anymore. I do like a little bit of like really light stuff, but I wouldn't heavy spar now. Like, I mean, unless you're getting ready for a fight, well, what's the point?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll get on to all of those bits, but you saying about the path that you were on with medicine, and now it sounds like you were all in on the coaching and enjoying life. Was there ever a point where you were thinking, just because of the state of UK MMA, although it sounds like you had more of an international remit with guys like Bisping, were you like, I could be doing something different, better, more lucrative somewhere else?
Well, I was, because I was working in rugby and I was working in other sports as a strength and conditioning coach.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so,
right.
And that's kind of like, in terms of my skill set of how I've ended up in the role that I'm in now, that's how that happened. And it's kind of like important, and it's kind of like led up to that. So, you know, I've always believed, like, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. And I believe to be like an expert in anything, you have to be passionate about it. You have to love what you do, because the amount of effort and hours that goes into it, if you don't like it, it's torture, or you're just not going to be able to do it. And I've dedicated my life to something that I'm passionate about, and I don't feel like I have like really long hours now, or I've always have, you know, I'm watching tape all the time and researching guides, game planning, all that stuff that goes into, or programming. But I love it. It's like it's my favourite thing to do. Yeah. And in the moment, that job that I have at the moment is my dream job. Like it's incredible what I'm able to do. But in at that time, I was like, okay, being an MMA coach is not the most lucrative thing. It's barely putting.
Well, they don't earn anything. People don't realise this, but a few £100s to fight at a really good like level,
yeah.
And what are you guys going to get? 10-20%?
Yeah, it was 10%, and depending on the level of involvement, it's like 5 or 10%. But obviously I have quite a few fighters, and then I had a gym as well that was you know, sort of ticking over and making a bit of money. But yeah, I was working as a consultant. I did some longer periods, like at the Queensland Reds in Australia, and then in Kubota in Japan. I worked with the England rugby team.
So sorry, because there was another guy at the Rough House. I'm really embarrassed. I've forgotten his name now. That Dan was very close to, who used to
Ollie Richardson.
So Ollie, yes.
So we've worked together a lot.
I was going to say
a lot of that stuff came off working with him.
Right.
And I effectively did my internship in strength and conditioning under Ollie.
Right.
And but a lot of opportunities that have come through, like in Australia we worked together, in Japan we worked together.
And he again was a member of the Rough House crew.
Well, he was that Rough House strength and conditioning coach.
Right.
He got involved in training and stuff, and Ollie's been a mentor to me since then, particularly in terms of my coaching. And he was the first person to introduce me to the idea around periodization and structuring your training, and where you put certain sessions in relation to other sessions, and getting the most optimizing your training, etc. And took me down that sort of path. And a lot of about the way that I structure training now comes off some of the stuff that we, you know, developed early on. So as I mentioned earlier, I started wrestling for my rugby, but then I became a contact skills coach in rugby. So I'd like do tackling technique, breakdown skills, and then using wrestling as like a conditioning modality for like fitness, and it's like a safe way to do like conditioning, because there's lots of wrestling drills and stuff that I've developed, and that's what I was doing with England rugby in the lead up to the 2019 World Cup, and so those opportunities are much more lucratively paid, I guess, than in anything in MMA, and so that was like subsidizing me being able to be involved in MMA, but at the same time developing me as a coach, because working in professional sport and seeing how they structure just the organisation of staff, the organisation of training, the amount of planning that goes into a session. You know, the rugby coaches will plan a couple of weeks ahead in terms of what they're doing in the actual sessions. Every session has a plan that all the coaches have, and everyone knows what they're doing. Everyone knows how many minutes the rounds are, or they're doing this drill for 10 minutes and then they're over here and doing, sometimes they'll have a carousel going with different coaches and the groups move around, and there's so much like structure to how they plan in terms of like skill acquisition and developing them physically and technically or tactically, and we don't have that in MMA. It's you go in, the coach, you don't know if the coach has planned anything, or if he has planned it, he planned it for that session, not necessarily in relation to anything else that's happening in the week or in the weeks ahead. There's no like technical assessment around, we're just doing this in the class, but it's not like targeted to the people in the class about where their strengths and weaknesses are and what they need to develop. It's like quite generic in terms of what we're going to be working on that, and that's just I don't know where, that's just seems to be the martial arts, or even it just seems to be the martial arts way that's come from how old martial arts are. But in other sports, and I've worked in water polo and I guess rowing doesn't have technical aspect, but those other sports where there are a technical part of it, the level of detail that goes into session planning and programming has really influenced what I believe needs to be done in MMA, and it needs to be targeted, it needs to be specific to the athlete and on their strengths and weaknesses, so you're not just doing generic training for the sake of it that's not necessarily helping their style or the way they need to develop or the stage of their level, whether they're a beginner, an intermediate or a pro. So I'm like incredibly grateful for that financially, being able to be involved in professional sport, but in terms of the impact it had on my approach to coaching, it's why I have this role now.
Well, I'm pleased that you weren't seduced by all of these other sports, and then we never got to have your skills and expertise over in mixed martial arts.
Well, MMA is my passion, and I wanted to stay in. It's like I'd be happy working in any sport, but obviously MMA is my passion. It's the only sport that I watch. So I did my, I was close. Sometimes I was like, I had a couple of opportunities to take me away full time and be involved in another sport, but I always came back. And then, I'd say there's a little bit of luck involved in the time that the PI opened in Shanghai. And I think as soon as I applied for it, I knew I was a pretty strong candidate because of the way that I knew that the PI would like to approach training. And then my background of the sort of cross between non-technical, like performance training, sports science, S&C and all of that stuff, and then my technical experience as well. I felt like it suited the way that I knew that the PI would probably want to approach training. And then I got the job, and the rest is history, sort of thing.
Well, before I go into the detail about getting into the PI, I'll just, my 2 pennies worth. My only other sort of foray into like decent level of competition was triathlon. There's a lot of money in triathlon, and it's actually very, very scientific. And I did a season, and I managed to get over the line on a full Ironman. But I was just blown away by the level that people go to with their periodization of training, how it goes. And there's not a lot apart from swimming, and well, there is technique, but it's not the same. And I just thought, if these people were attracted to our sport, like they could take the level up. Like the most ridiculous thing I'd never known through my time in MMA, and I started in, I don't know, 2006, let's say, like Mark Chen. If we go hard, and we're replenishing with a bottle of water. Then coconut water came on the market and everyone was raving about it. I do some triathlon work, and all of a sudden I'm using proper electrolytes, salt sticks, X, Y, and Z.
Energy gels.
Oh my goodness. Like it's crazy.
There's a lot of research that's gone into that. Triathlon and all sort of like long distance sports. Effectively, there's so much. There is and swimming. Like one of my colleagues who I worked at the PI worked with long distance swimmers. I forget the name. I guess it's just called long distance swimming. They swim in lakes and stuff. It's not like at pools.
The open water stuff.
Open water, that's it, And like technique for them is incredibly important. Like how often
the efficiency in the water.
Efficiency, because over distance, and like if you're off at an angle, that's taking your time away, and where the timing, you're lifting your head, where the waves are, because if you look up in the wave above, now you can't see where you're supposed to be going, and all of that stuff. I was amazed to hear about the level of technique that went into swimming, which you think is just I was pretty naive.
Just turning your arms over.
Even though I can't really swim, so I'm not one to talk.
but what it did for me, I just thought I got very positive about how far MMA can go. the science that we could draw on it if we had the right expertise, which then leads me on to the UFC Performance Institute. Now, we, as MMA fans, we all saw what they put in Vegas, and people from around the world descend now. Like, every time I call a fight, pretty much everyone's in Vegas now for some part of their camp, and they just rave about it. But the Shanghai PI dwarfs what they have here in Vegas. And you got the nod. So first of all, like, what's your job title and your remit?
Yeah, so I'm the technical director of the Performance Institute in Shanghai, and effectively I'm the head coach. So I'm in charge of all the technical training, but the reason that title is like the technical director is because I oversee all the performance services. So we have strength and conditioning, sports performance nutrition, sports science, sports medicine, and we have sports psychology as well. But we obviously have department heads of all of those departments, and I don't get in the weeds of. I'm not overseeing in terms of getting in the weeds of like what they're doing like day to day, but it's more about the interdisciplinary approach to MMA preparation and making sure that everyone's communicating, they're not working in silos, and making sure that departments aren't doing contradictory things that might be working. We're all pointing in the same direction, and we're all working towards a sort of unified and realised goal. So it's and then in terms of the actual what we're doing at the PI, we have an academy, and we're recruiting talent from all over China, putting them through the regional scene, and we can go into more detail about what that sort of looks like in terms of recruitment and everything.
You said China.
Yeah.
Is it exclusively China, or is it the Asia? So can people from all over Asia come to?
Yeah, so now that's opening up actually.
Okay.
So the next combine, which is going to be in March, and the combine is are you familiar with the NFL combine?
So I hadn't heard of it before the Road to UFC.
Okay, yeah.
So please explain, because I'm sure there are more people like me who didn't understand.
So the NFL combine is quite like, that's a televised thing over here. It's quite a big deal. It's like a recruitment thing from college to the NFL, and they do like technical and non-technical tests. One of them is like the 40-meter or 40-yard dash.
Right.
And the time that someone gets in that means a lot, and people that's effectively how fast you are, right? So it's one of the markers that you want in a wide receiver or particular positions. But every position does it though. They want to see how fast they are, and there's other things depending position specific things that they make them do. And then the scouts for the different NFL teams are there at the combine, and then they'll the order of which people are on the draft it can be impacted by obviously their record in that college year, but also how they perform in the combine. So it's it's a recruitment tool effectively, for talent ID. And so we using that model, because it is a successful model, and I think basketball has a combine as well. I don't think it's quite as influential as the NFL one, but we followed that model and then created non-technical tests that are specific to MMA in terms of the attributes that you want, like reaction time, lower body power, conditioning. There's a number of like non-technical tests, and then technical tests of striking, grappling, and wrestling, and then they effectively get scores because of that. And we've got an algorithm that creates a total score that collates all the data from those different testing points, but then it's not just the combine. We look at their fight record, we look at fight footage, we look at the opponents that they've fought, the level that they've fought at, their age, lots of different things. And we do also on the sports medicine side, we screen them for injuries, and then our head of sports medicine, Tim Roberts, will give me a report on each athlete about their injury status and injury history. Because if
do like blood work as well?
We don't do blood work.
Okay.
On the combine we don't.
Okay.
But it's just more like a musculoskeletal screen, and then and looking at them in that way. And then when it comes down to it, there's 30 athletes that get this scholarship. So it comes down to people making a decision about
how many come through the door.
50.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do they apply, or do you guys go out?
They apply, and also Peter Zhang, who
yes.
Peter's our director of athlete development,
right?
And he's well connected. We call him the Chinese John Jones,
right?
John Jones, the Chinese Joe Rogan,
right? Okay.
And he commentates on the Chinese feed, and he's really well connected, like known and connected in China, in the Chinese MMA scene. He's been around a long time, worked for the UFC for a long time as well. So he knows all the managers, all the promotions in China,
right?
And then sometimes he's commentating on regional shows as well,
Right.
And so he like sees guys, and then he creates a list of about 100 guys.
Oh, he's useful then.
Yeah, we couldn't do it without him. He's so
Right.
connected. In China it'd be really difficult to work without him. So we have he creates a list of like 100 guys, and then myself and Forrest and the other coaches, we whittle that down to 50 and invite them in. It may be a little bit more, depending on like if there's like good guys that you want to look at, or women, and then they come in and they stay for a week. We fly them into Shanghai. They stay for a week for the combine. The first 3 days is test familiarization, so they haven't so they're not just going into the tests blind. They have an idea of what they're like. But then we also have some like technical training, just to have like a general look at them, see how they are, look at their attitude, look at their response to coaching, and see because that's important as well. You can have all the talent in the world, but if they're think they know it all, then there's more of a ceiling on how they can develop. Whereas you've got a guy maybe who's not quite as good but seems really hungry to learn and is coachable, then maybe they've got a longer way to go in terms of development.
This might be a really hard question to answer, but I'm just trying to put myself in the mind of the athletes, and I don't know intimately what it's like in China, but I got a little idea from doing the Road to UFC. How big of a deal is it for one of those 50 that is coming, in terms of where they're from and then what this could unlock for them?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of outside of the MMA community, it's still not massive, because the sport isn't as big there, and that's what we're there to do. We're trying to develop it. But in the MMA scene, like they're hungry to get on in this. I mean, anywhere. Think of anywhere where you've got a program where you're training full time with international technical coaches, all the performance services, all the facility, they pay their food, and we have a canteen with performance nutrition.
So it's subsidised?
Everything's subsidised.
Wow.
All they do is turn up and train.
For how long?
A year.
They get like a
year
scholarship.
It's a year contract. I can cut them at any point,
right?
If they don't fit
Brutal.
in, or I don't know. I mean,
it must be super hard for you on that.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, especially, I was only joking.
And we can come to that as well. It's year. Well, there's a lot to explain. I guess. Part of it as well, we tier them. So once we come through the combine, we select the 30, and then we tier them A, B, and C. Mm-hmm. A is effectively ready for Road to UFC, around a year from the UFC that we think their level's at. And
again, just to give some something to compare against, would you say that's Dana White's Contender Series level as well?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so
just
like that feeder,
just that sort of level. And then tier B was like 2 years development, and then tier C is like our 18-year-old that we have coming through, 19-year-olds that we know are longer term development, 4 years plus. And so as they go through the year, we start them in those tiers, but when they win fights, and they're maybe tougher fights than or a level that's tougher than where they're at, they can go from a C to a B, or they can go from B to an A. But conversely, if they lose fights that we think they should be winning, they can drop down, and if they lose too many, they can be cut.
Right.
So there's that aspect of it. So we try to keep it competitive, and so the people are hungry to be there, because it's a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity for them to. There's nothing else like it until obviously.
It's a big population
Mexico.
as well, isn't it? So 50 spots is.
30 spots in the academy.
30 spots, yeah.
And but the MMA scene in China is smaller than the MMA scene in the UK.
Is it really?
Yeah, I did an analysis of it using like topology, because you can check by region, and then each weight division checked how many people there were, and there's more in the UK than there are in China.
And yet the Shanghai PI is this like enormous facility.
Yeah, but I mean that's the reason though, right? We're planning to have these academies in areas that don't have the infrastructure to develop the sport.
Right.
So England has lots of gyms, quite a lot of participation. America obviously doesn't need it. I think over 50% of the roster is American. Brazil has a huge amount in the roster. So we're going to go to territories like Mexico, who is more of a boxing nation and doesn't have the MMA fighters that are Mexican in the UFC normally live in America. They're not actually from. They probably might be from Mexico, but not necessarily living there. And we're going to be reaching out to Latin America as well and developing. So the idea from the UFC is to try and raise the level of the sport in territories that don't have it as established.
Sure.
So So I get what you're saying, but at the same time, if we waited for Chinese MMA to develop, we'd be there another 10 years maybe. So we're trying to accelerate that growth. But as you mentioned. I'm kind of like jumping around here a little bit.
That's okay.
But this combine, we're opening up to the rest of Asia. The only reason we hadn't is because of COVID. Up until January of 2023, you had to have do a 2-week quarantine every time you came back into China. So up until very recently, so we couldn't have international guys coming in, and that's why we haven't had international events. And also, it's very difficult to get a visa to come in. So that's why the first year was going to be all Chinese, and the plan was from 2020 to be opening up to Asia, and then we've been living in a bubble effectively that whole time. So this year, now that we're open, we've got Indian guys coming, Indonesian, a guy from Singapore and from the Philippines, and then same thing with Japan and Korea, is that their infrastructure is pretty established. They'd be welcome to come and join, but I don't think that those guys are pretty. They have a good setup as it is, and they're welcome to come and train, and we'll have guest spots coming out. But in terms of that long-term development, I don't think it's as needed in Korea and Japan as it is in those other countries that I just mentioned. In India, since Anshul's won, MMA's just like blown up.
Anshul Jubilee.
And they've got
Jekka Sadeghi in Indonesia.
There's like big TV deal in Indonesia now off the back of that with
Mola.
They're really pushing it, which is good. In India, there's a new they've had to start their own Instagram account for the UFC, which also shows that it's developing in that territory. So
I love that.
Yeah, it's
great.
know
it's developing, so I've got an Instagram account. But it's true, right?
You know what I mean? Though? It's kind of
100%.
like a benchmark for
that's
something.
Where we're at.
Yeah. And it's exciting to see these new talent come in, and in that recruitment process, I still like that list that Peter sends us for those international guys, and looking at them. There's some real talent coming through those areas, and it's just amazing to see. Again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, where the sport was in 2003, and now we're on every continent. I can't wait for Africa to have a PI. I think that's in the plans as well. In the Middle East, and Abu Dhabi, they'll probably PI after Mexico.
Right.
And just think about the talent that's going to come out of those places. It's so exciting.
Yeah.
So back to the recruitment. I don't know what the actual question was.
Well, it was. I was saying about the athletes coming in and what it meant to them, because.
Okay. So, thank you. So for them, if you think about Alatang Haley, the first guy from the academy, Haley, he's from Inner Mongolia, and he's come from like really humble background. Like his family, he's live in sort of like a nomadic sort of
shepherds, aren't they? Type thing.
And live in yurts and things like that. And his first fight in the UFC after he came from the academy, he won Fight of the Night for $50,000 plus whatever he was his purses. That's more money than his whole village earned in a year, and he's earning it in one night. And he's been able to go back there like a king, and buy them everything that they needed, and for his family and stuff, and literally providing for his whole village. And like now he's living in Arizona. I just saw recently that he's got a brand new Range Rover.
Right.
And it's incredible to see that what opportunities that opened up for these guys. Same with Richelung and all these guys. It's like it's hard to give coming from a Western world, and the lifestyle that we have, the opportunities we have, and comparing it to where they're coming from and what they're fighting for. And it's not just for themselves, it's for their families, and they all talk about it. Whenever they come in, I always sit them down, and there's lots of questions I go over, like their career path and what they want to do, what their career goals, why they're fighting, trying to get that understanding about them. And they all talk about providing for their family, every single one of them.
Right.
It's not just about them and what they want to achieve. Of course, that's part of it. But when you're motivated by that, it's really powerful. Really powerful.
I'd love to draw on some of your experiences just to get an idea of the culture. So I've spoken with like Eddie Cha at Fight Ready. You're saying about the guys from Mongolia. Yeah. I'd like to hear if you know the same stories. Those guys from Mongolia are like. He just said they're just very different, and when they get together as well, how they support one another. And then the Genghis Khan thing. Do you know about all of this, and like what are your experiences with the guys from Mongolia specifically?
Yeah, well, it's funny because in the academy we actually don't have any guys from Shanghai, and they're either from Tibet, from Xinjiang, which is like the Muslim Chinese area, or Mongolia. They're like the three areas that are most represented within the academy.
Okay.
Not Han. We have a few Han Chinese, which is like what you would consider like, I don't know what the word, I don't want to say normal, but that's the wrong word to use, but like the majority ethnic group, right? Is Han Chinese, and then these other are more like smaller ethnic groups.
Yes.
In terms of Tibet, Mongolia, and Xinjiang, and they all get on really well. They train really well together, and it's not. But when on the social side of things, they definitely go into their groups because they also have slightly different languages.
Right.
So what's interesting as well is that I'm coaching through a translator, which has its like challenges, and it's definitely developed me as a coach. You know,
I could barely do an interview in the Octagon with all. I don't know how the guys do it.
Yeah, it's tough. But I worked, like I said, I worked in Japan for 3 years before I had this job, and I was working through a translator there, and it developed me as a coach and trying to have more implicit drills where the outcome of the drill is what you're trying to coach, and it takes less like. You don't actually need as many words as you think.
You have to become a communication specialist.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely trying to improve that, and I think it's improved me as a coach having that barrier, because when I do coach guys that speak English, I'm just like, wow, this is easy.
Gotcha.
it's going back to it now after being away from it for so long. But so I'm going through a translator who's talking Mandarin, but then these guys, that Mandarin's not even their first language. The Mandarin's their second language. Their first language either Mongolian, Tibetan, or Kazakh for the Xinjiang guys.
Right.
So add that layer to it, right? And we've had some guys who don't even speak Mandarin, and the translator translates, and they're like, for example, Shailan.
Oh yeah.
Shailan would translate to the other guy in Kazakh because he didn't understand Mandarin. So I'm on the mats coaching, and then he's like talking second. It's a lot can be lost through translation.
I was going to say, they call it Chinese whispers for a reason.
Yeah, and the cues that you use in coaching in terms of like external or internal cueing and the choice of language can be really important. There's a lot of research around that. There's a guy called Nick Winkelman who talks about the language of coaching, how important it is. So I try to. Talk to my translators about that, but it's not just about translation, it's about interpretation as well, because you can't just translate word for word sometimes, because it doesn't the words either don't exist or the concept doesn't exist. You've got to try and be as literal as possible as well. You can't talk in metaphors, you can't talk in story, because they don't get the context of what you're talking about, so it adds all those layers. But with the Mongolian guys, they're just like, all the groups, they're very supportive of each other. They're very proud of where they're from. They're very, they're proud of their sort of that warrior. They're all like warriors in their own right, in some way or form. Particularly on the Mongolian side, they're proud. They've got the Genghis Khan tattoos on them. Like Arychalung's got something on him, and
I've heard they always put the flag up.
Yeah.
Like even when just before a fight, and they all believe they have the blood of Genghis Khan.
They do, yeah. They're real warriors. Like there's no other way to. You look at something in their eyes. It's just like they are warrior people, and it's incredible. They're really good to work with as well. I'm not sure Eddie would have said the same thing. They're like great students. They're all really good students.
Yeah, really hardworking. And they cheer each other on, like when they're doing strength and conditioning.
Yeah.
It's like a cheerleading group.
Yeah, they support each other on the mats and then off the mats as well. When they're cornering each other or supporting each other and traveling and all of that, they're really good. And I wouldn't necessarily pick out those guys. I think the Tibetan guys or the Embo guys,
right.
the Embo guys. The story of Embo, I'm not sure of how.
I didn't know whether it was controversial, so I'll be.
I don't think so.
No, well, when I first called fights in China, we weren't. I don't know, but we weren't allowed to talk much about Mr. Enbo.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so we were quiet about it. But also there was the whole Tibetan thing.
Yeah.
I think it was Sumudaji. He wasn't allowed to be called the Tibetan. I don't know. I think there are sensitivities, but I don't think that's the case now, because we're definitely allowed to talk about.
He just had a film made about him. And it's huge in China.
Sumudaji.
No, about Embo, Mr. Embo.
Well, I think Sumudaji's got a movie out as well.
Oh, really?
But so now I know that it's very much
okay.
it's an open conversation. But yeah, let us know about this guy, because he actually sounds like he has saved and transformed so many lives.
So many lives. I don't want to exaggerate, but the impact. He might be one of in the top 10 most significant people in terms of impact. In MMA, like worldwide, I think, because if you think about this is like in an international sense, right?
Sure.
The number of half of the Chinese fighters are from Embo.
Right.
So Song Yudong, Sumu, Mahashata, now Rongju, now Ija, and then Jinyu, who didn't make it last night, but maybe he might still get signed, is Embo. Chulun, who was on the tournament before, is Embo. You know, that's crazy to be from like one place that he's trained these guys and brought them in as kids, underprivileged kids particularly, and then given them a place to live, training them. You know, we've got a couple of guys that are in the academy now who are 18. They're both orphans, and he took them out of like workshops when they're 8 years old and gave them a house. And they're training, and I was like, "Oh God!" Honestly, it's like crazy.
Have you been to visit?
Yeah, I've been to visit them, and it's like where they've come from. And he's the orphan, and we're like in Bali. He fought recently, and I'm just like, I can't. He can't believe that he's there doing it,
right.
and I'm like here supporting him. Do that and like realize his dreams and where he's come from, and he's like, it's just incredible what he's done for these kids, and then now they're like, you know, around the world doing like incredibly well. And he was literally in a workshop at 8 years old, and he saved him from there. And then some of them have similar stories. Not all of them are like that, but he's 18. He's 11-1 at 18, and he just fought some Russian guy who was like 9-1. It was like his first tough fight. We tried to get them in talking about the pathway for these tier B and tier A. If they're not picked, because it's not like a hard line between B and A, right? We're just generally like gauging where they're at.
Right.
But for those guys, we get them international fights. I've been speaking to Graham Boylan. We haven't worked it out yet, but we're hoping that he's open to it, getting the guys on Cage Warriors. But we've had them a few on UAE Warriors.
Yes.
We've got
Rongju was on UAE.
Yeah, Rongju's
right.
UAE Warriors. One Song was. We'll talk about One Song in a minute as well. And then Hex in Australia, Eternal, and then the Bali Chengdu Fight Now, which is it's an up and coming show. So we're trying to get them those international fights and international opponents, so that we're, you know, same thing what I said about Ed, you know, trying to test them, not just like use
proper tests.
Yeah, proper tests, and not leveraging our connection with the matchmakers to get them the shortcut. We don't. That's not part of my KPI. Our KPI is getting them in the UFC and them staying in the UFC and having an impact, getting into the rankings and, you know, moving up. We're still early stages, but that's where we're going for. It's not a numbers game of just like how many people we've signed. We want successful Chinese fighters that have long lasting careers. But yeah, so this Embo guy, had former fighter, former military guy, and then has hundreds of kids that have gone through this training facility, and it's effectively like the PI sort of model, but it's not like a scholarship. He's like they're there, they live there full time, and they're like proper brothers.
He funds this,
it all,
doesn't he?
And they don't, you know, like normal gyms, you give like 10% to the gym. He doesn't take anything. So all these guys, he's just doing it because, and they like call him dad. And,
well, it's now coming together because on some of the questions I asked the Chinese fighters for Road to UFC, I asked them, who are you going to call if you get the contract? And a few of them, Ija, and I'll call my godfather.
Yeah.
And I think that's who
they're
mean.
talking about. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they call. I forget. There's a word that's like dad, but not dad. Excuse me. They call him, and I went and visited him. He wasn't. He was a little bit unwell recently, so I went to visit him when I went to see Ija. Yeah. After the.
Is this in Sichuan? Is that
Sichuan? Yeah, in Chengdu. And went and had dinner with him, like pay my respects to him in a way, because of acknowledging the role that he's played in Chinese MMA, and you know, and to them just showing that showing my respect to them. I know it's good. It was been, and I mean it. I was not doing it for just for the sake of it, but I know that it's good for our relationship, just to show them that I'm their boss, you know, or they call me Laoban in terms of like head coach. Yeah. But I want to show that I show respect.
You know his role.
Yes. Yeah. Acknowledging it, giving acknowledgement to the role that he's played, and we had dinner together and stuff, and it was like a big feast. And the way they are, they call him. I forget the name of the word, but it's basically like dad. And they those guys, they are brothers. You know, they lived together since they were kids, and the closeness that they have is like nothing I've ever seen really. They're like they're just a huge group of like siblings. It's a beautiful thing, and they all support each other like really well. And that's why in this time when Ija and Li Kawen were fighting each other, for starters they were really good friends. Like in that trip that we went, and I went into Tibet to visit to his actual hometown, Ija's hometown up in the mountains. It was like a really incredible experience. But you know, Li Kawen came on that, acted as my translator, thankfully, and you know, they're really good friends. It must have been really challenging for them to fight. But in terms of the choice of like who stayed and who went, because Ija is Team Embo, and his Coach Wang, who he's the technical coach there, who you would have seen cornering all these guys. It wouldn't have made sense for Ija to leave and then him still be there with Jinyu and Rongju and then Lee Kai-Wen be there. So we had that conversation. It was a very like open conversation. We said if he wanted to stay at the PI, he could have, and we would have just like split training partners and made it work. But then we offered him to send him to Thailand, which we did, and he went with Bang Tao, and the Hickmore brothers looked after him, and it was it was fine.
Then he did Syndicate as well, didn't he?
And because it was when it switched from Shanghai to here, he had to come back to China to get his American visa, which is always like trouble for these guys.
Right.
Like a couple of the corners got their visa denied, and so it was quite difficult sometimes. So he had to be in China, and then rather than going back to Thailand and then disrupting everything, he thought he'd just come here. And the guy, you know, John Wood's a fantastic coach, and Syndicate's a great gym, so he was in good hands for that last, I think, maybe 3-4 weeks of camp.
I've got to touch on the softer elements of coaching, because I can see how much this means to you, and you've been such a great resource for me as I've been trying to prepare for commentary, and you care deeply. The guy from Windsor, this English dude who's found himself over in China. I don't know if you had any connections to that part of the world before.
No,
but a lot of cultural differences, but we could just see how much you.
And if I'm completely honest, I'm embarrassed about how ignorant I was about China before I went there. You know, we get a perception through the media and maybe even films and stuff of a particular way of it being, and I almost thought it was like quite a homogenous culture. But then when I've got there, how rich and diverse the culture is from those different ethnic groups, the different, like every province, which is like a state in America, has really distinctive styles of cooking. Like the Chinese that we have in England, it's actually like Cantonese food, really.
Right.
It's not even like proper Chinese food.
Okay.
And it's like, you know, sweet and sour pork or whatever. Chicken balls or whatever, which is delicious. Yeah. But it's not, you know, it's not you don't find that type of food over in I
think we have that with Indian food as well, a little bit, don't we?
Yeah, there's like an English version of it, and I guess the Cantonese with Hong Kong and our connection to Hong Kong, I think that's where it sort of came from, right? But in China, it's like on the Xinjiang food, which is the western border of China, and it's bordering like a lot of the stands for
the Central Asia,
and so that it's very like sort of Arabic style influenced food, but mixed with Chinese food, which is like it's amazing. And then the Tibetan food is very distinctive, the Mongolian is as well, and obviously they, you know, sometimes use like different cuts than we would use of meat, and they like offal and stuff, but you know, I've come to like it, and you know, I'm always, especially when I go out with them for dinner, if they offer me stuff, I always try it, just because I don't want to, you know, be rude or whatnot.
Yes, gotcha.
And they're proud of their culture, and just learning about their different cultures. And then when they welcome me in, like when I went to Tibet to visit Ija, the welcome they gave me, I felt like a visiting king. It was crazy. Like they literally had a welcome party for me, and they put on this like thing over my neck, and they had this feast laid out for me, and you know, they were introducing me to people. I was the only foreigner in that town that whole thing while I was there, so there's no foreigners there at all, let alone a black guy, but they were just so like welcoming and like smiling and happy that I was there, asking for photos with me and stuff, and they like really welcomed me in and let me experience their culture, and one of the best things about this job has been that like experience of the different cultures and the way that different people live, and just open my eyes to a lot. And I love it. Like a lot of people are like, oh, you know, how's China? What's it like? Like I love living in China. It's amazing.
Really?
Yeah.
And yeah, again, you'll have to excuse this line of questioning, but of course it's not something I necessarily would have thought of. But yeah, being a black guy from the UK going out to China, did you have to consider that and how you might be received?
Yeah, but I have to think about that everywhere.
Okay.
Like, even coming here,
right?
Like, do you know what I mean? So it's like in America, it's just part of how things are. It's just a consideration. But I haven't had any negative experience in terms of if anything, it's like positive. They're like
Right.
intrigued and like they point and smile, but it's not like xenophobia. It's just like, oh look, there's a foreign guy. But I think it's the same. And my white friends who are there and they go to certain cities where there's not a lot of foreigners. It's the same experience for them, and people are like just interested by someone different.
Yes.
Because some of those they have tiered cities. Like a tier 1 city is Beijing, Shenzhen, and then there's like tier 2, tier 3.
Right.
And the tier 3 ones are less likely to have like Starbucks and things like that.
Gotcha.
And they're like, but they can still be like 2. Like the 50th largest city in China is 2.5 million people.
It's such a vast country.
So big, right? It's 50th.
Yeah.
We have 2 cities over in England over 2 million. I think Manchester is over 2 million, maybe.
Right.
I don't know. It's not that big, right?
Yeah.
So just to give you a perspective of like how big some cities are, and then but when you go there, they just like no foreigners whatsoever, and they just like.
Yeah.
What's that? Especially the kids. It's funniest with the kids. Like, it's been like funny, like a kid like holding his mum's hand, and I'm walking past, and he's just like looking at me like in absolute amazement, like walking into a pole, because he's like looking at me rather than know where he's walking, because he's just like never seen anything like it in real life. It's funny, but it hasn't been a negative experience. Like I've enjoyed it. Even though I'm sure there is stuff that goes on, and I've heard about that, but in my personal experience, I can't say. It's only been positive. What's
been a couple of the nicest kind of cultural shocks going and living over in Shanghai?
Well, in Shanghai, it's not a huge cultural shock. It's a really metropolitan city with a huge expat community. Like you'll go to some bars or restaurants, and there'll be only like foreigners.
Okay,
that happens like a lot. There's like foreigner.
Is there a word for foreigner in China?
A Laowai. Laowai, yeah.
Okay,
and. So and then the main city part downtown of Shanghai, you could be anywhere. You could be New York. It looks like in terms of modern buildings and all of that stuff. So Shanghai is not really
easy transition.
Yeah, it's not really a culture shock. And then when some of our local friends will take you to like the more local restaurants, then sometimes it's definitely the cuts of meat that like take you aback. Like chicken feet and like just. The way the meat is prepared is definitely different to.
And you're about it. You give it a go.
Oh yeah, I will. Yeah, I will. I mean, I don't choose to. Like maybe necessarily. Like if it's my choice where I'm going somewhere, I wouldn't like. That's like.
Gotcha. Yeah,
that wouldn't be my first. But if somebody is inviting me out, I'm definitely not going to say no to anything, and I just like be polite sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's where you get the culture shock. But then when you travel, then it's more about the food side of things. That's the culture shock for sure.
Right. We'll just circle back to the more technical stuff about. I love all of this though. It's so important to understand, because it's not just about your 9 to 5 and clocking in.
Yeah.
Some of us go to work and we don't have to consider so many of these aspects. But you're going to work. It's a 15-hour plane ride from the UK and a very different part of town without your family around. I would imagine. So, what is your overarching goal with what you're trying to achieve right now?
My well, for the goals for this year, we've already exceeded them in terms of the road to UFC, and we've got one, hopefully one more coming. I don't know if this is definitely official yet, but we're hoping that the third fight, the bantamweight fight, is going to be on the first round of the next road to UFC.
Right.
We're hoping for a win there as well, which would be three contracts, but. There's the sort of shorter term goals or medium term goal of developing Chinese MMA, more guys into UFC, guys getting into the rankings, and raising Chinese MMA on a world level and making Chinese MMA or Asian MMA considered a powerhouse. Like if we can get China to the level of Europe, that would definitely be something I'd be happy with. But in terms of the longer term goal, in terms of the legacy aspect, we're trying to expand the sphere of influence of the PI in China, and we've got some guys going through an athlete coach program now.
Right.
So Zhang Jafar and Wooly Jaburan.
I remember Wooly
Jaburan and Zhang Jafar. He was on Contenders as well.
Okay.
He lost the split decision, but they're older. They're 34, 35.
So you're giving them a path.
Yeah, giving them a pathway back into coaching. We involve them in team meetings and staff meetings and stuff like that, and then we give them access to some of the coaching content that I've produced. And then if using them as cover sessions, bringing them in and talking them through the decision making that goes into some of the programming and coaching, and then hopefully developing them as coaches. And then when they go back to their home gyms, they're now better coaches for it, and then producing more guys that can then feed into the academy.
Right.
So it's like making that loop bigger rather than just like focusing
like
on
an
the guys
organic sort of system.
And then also doing like workshops with the amateur association, bringing those guys in, and whenever, as you know, we can't corner the guys in the road to UFC because of the sort of conflict of interest. So we bring, whenever they have a fight, 6 weeks before the fight, we bring in their coach to make sure that they're involved in game planning, in watching them spar, and then we do the same thing with their coaches. We involve them in team meetings. We talk them through how we do breakdown of video and give them access to everything that the PI has available to them, to their upskilling as well in terms of strength and conditioning and preparing them in terms of periodization and all of that stuff. And then the same model that they then go back after those fights to their home gyms, hopefully applying some of that stuff. We can't make them, but they seem to respond really well to it, and in learning and developing as coaches. Every coach wants to be a better coach. There isn't that many resources in MMA for developing and education stuff. So we're producing like a certification on technical coaching, as well as not just like not technical coaches like this is how you throw a punch, but technical coaching in terms of how to structure training, all of that, the non-technical aspects of technical training.
I saw this document that you kindly shared with me. Is it like 460-page document?
Yeah, the PI Journal Volume 2. Yeah.
What a resource.
Yeah, so that's an example of something that we give them access to. We have a translated version of that, which they get access to. And that is supposed to be a resource for the MMA community. There's everything from weight cutting to sleep cycles and jet lag and sports science. There's all aspects of MMA preparation is pretty much in there, and that was a huge undertaking by the whole PI team, both Shanghai and Las Vegas, and ran by Dr. Duncan French, the VP of performance.
A Brit.
Brits, yeah.
A lot of people know this, but there's a Brit who's kind of. So we got British guys that are really important, and Australian guys as well.
But he'd written the first journal, but then the second one was like a collaborative, like massive team effort, and we were really fortunate actually. In terms that's one of the positive things to come out of COVID. When COVID hit, and we were luckily outside of Shanghai or outside of China because of Chinese New Year, so all the staff sort of gone on holiday because we shut down for Chinese New Year.
Right.
And then COVID hit, and they were like, "Don't go back to China." So they brought us here. So we were in Vegas, and we were all here together. And that was right around the time that when Izzy fought Romero.
Okay.
And then I think the week after that, it was the last fight with Gaethje and Tony Ferguson, and then everything shut down. Right, I think it was around that time.
Brasilia was the shutdown and the start of the pandemic. Because I got burned. I'm sorry to make it about me.
It's all right.
Leon Edwards was supposed to be fighting Tyron
Woodley. Yeah.
And we got to Monday of fight week,
right?
And then the plug got pulled.
That was it. Yes, exactly. So that reminds me. So it was March time. It was my birthday's March 9th. It was right around there, and I had my birthday here in Vegas, which was fun, obviously, and then everything shut down, and so Vegas was shut, the PI was shut, and we were just like, right, what are we going to do in this time? We weren't working with athletes, and we wanted to do the journal anyway, and so that's the time that we did it. And we were really fortunate. I had friends that work in professional sport that were put on. I forget the word they used. It were like the different.
I've forgotten it. How can we forget? Because it's. I think we all want to forget.
Yeah, but
I know what you mean.
And some people have just lost their job, and in rugby and stuff. And rugby league had a really hard time because they rely on TV. Pay and stuff like that. Yeah. And it was a really difficult time. And then in the UFC, Dana would send videos on a Monday to everyone in the company, and he would talking to the camera, just telling everyone it's going to be okay, and if you need anything, come to him. And it's like
Wolf of Wall Street. We're not fucking leaving.
It was. Yeah. It was amazing. I always look forward to those videos, and you're just like, let's do it. And then, we were writing that journal in that time. Vegas opened a little bit earlier than, quite a bit earlier than Shanghai, and we were stuck out of Shanghai until September of that year. The borders were shut, we couldn't get back in. But that's when we did it. I don't think, to try and do that any other time, it probably would have taken us a couple of years to do, because we just wouldn't have had the time, whereas we worked on it full time in that break.
It's like the encyclopedia of all things MMA.
Yeah, it was really enjoyable working on it. It was like going back to uni in terms of I tried to keep up to date with the research, but I'm not every day reading journals and stuff like that. But for that, I wanted to make sure I had my ducks in a row, and anything I'm talking about is that's out. I want to make sure that I'm correct about stuff. So it was like going back to school a little bit and making sure that, you know, everything was good, and just collaboratively talking about some of those ideas. You know, we've got some really heavy hitters within the team, like, you know, Gavin Pratt and Felix Falkenberg, and you know, there's Heather Linden, who's the head of sports medicine in Las Vegas. You know, world leading practitioners, for want of a better word, and we were just putting our minds together, and that's effectively it all written down on paper. It's we're very, very, very proud of that legacy piece for MMA. You know, there's nothing really like it.
Yeah, and what I've also noticed now is other sports are looking to you guys. Like there's space sharing. I know that you've had some, or maybe you can tell us about some of the other sports that have come over to the PI in Shanghai to use your facility and draw on the resources and the expertise.
Yeah, so we do work with external athletes. We work particularly with the Chinese Olympic Committee. So they'll send obviously the combat sports. And they do like training camps with us, and we'll do all the diagnostic testing, like strength and power, similar to like what we do for the combine. But obviously, the tests that we've chosen for MMA are specific to MMA. There are some that obviously that translate to all sport, but we also do specific tests to the sport that they're doing. They come in. We have facilities for all combat sports to accommodate them, so they'll come and do counts. But then we also work with like rowing. We've done some of the winter sports like snowboarding, speed skating. We've had cyclists come in a lot. They're incredible power athletes, like the velodrome type cyclists.
Yeah. They got some big old legs on
bigger,
them.
Jeez. And some bubble butts going around.
Yeah.
And then just most recently, we're working with the Shenhua football team, which is the Shanghai soccer team. There's a Chinese soccer league.
Glad you said football.
Yeah.
Tick in the box.
Yeah. And they come in. They did a pre-season testing with us, and again, we'd like make it specific to the sort of requirements of or the demands of the sport of football, and then we also do like injury screening. Like there's this something called a force frame, which is like a made by a company called Vold, effectively measures force at different angles. So you can do like shoulder, hip, neck, and you look at like asymmetries between flexion and extension.
Okay.
And that can lead to like identifying potential injury risk when you have those asymmetries or weakness, and they're not meeting a certain threshold. So going through that, particularly for the hip and hamstring on an odd board, hamstring's obviously really important in football because of the sprinting element of it, and identifying weaknesses there can be important. So we do that type of screening and help them because of the resources that we have. Send them a report.
Wow, some serious kit.
Yeah, we've got it's the gadgets we have is pretty cool, and it's cool to get the acknowledgement from those sports that are outside of MMA that come and see our facility and using it as a resource and valuing our IP in terms of the way that we do the testing, but then obviously the actual hardware as well, what we have facility wise. Everything's state of the art, and Dana and the UFC have sort of spared no expense in terms of we're probably one of the better facilities in the world.
Yeah. Well, the big question, the $1 million question that we all want to know is: are our athletes, the UFC athletes, the MMA athletes, are they faster, stronger, more powerful, better specimens than any other sport out there?
I think as a well-rounded athlete, I think. It's hard to say if I'm completely honest.
Is it really difficult? I guess I have to give you certain metrics.
It's apples and pears. Yeah, it's it's hard to compare. Yeah. I think if you were to remember, I don't even remember that show back in the day where they like put different athletes against each other, and it was on BBC back in the UK.
I'm sure if I remember that.
It was like quite high profile. Athletes going on it, and I think in that sense, MMA athletes would come out really well because we're conditioned. The energy system demands of MMA are quite unique. There's an aerobic nature, which is like more longer distance, 25 minutes of competing at a high intensity, and then you need the power element, to in terms of finishing, which is more on the sort of alactic side of the energy systems. Whereas generally, sports are kind of more one end or the other, and we maybe hold that middle space. But in terms of like pure power athletes, then I think like it's hard to compete with like the NFL and basketball. If you look at the guys that are in there,
right?
Like, I'd love to say that we are the best, but I think that if you look at John Jones, for example, well, I'll give you. So my my model for MMA preparation is it's called, I call it the FMA model, which is the fighter, martial artist, and athlete.
Okay.
And the fighter being the psychological side of MMA preparation, the martial artist being the technical, tactical, and then the athlete being the physical or genetic aspects.
I'm so proud of this thing, because I used to ask fighters early on in my UFC career, do you call yourself a martial artist? I used to say prize fighter or an athlete. So I think
you're onto it.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
so
Please continue.
But I don't think you're. I think I could create a Venn diagram of those three things.
Okay.
And it's about where you sit within them.
Yeah.
I think if you think of the greatest fighters, I mean, we can debate this, but I personally have Khabib as number one of all time.
Interesting.
But
it's hard.
I'd happily go into it, but use him or use John Jones. If you sort of score him and those three attributes. As a fighter, John Jones has, in fights that have been very close, always come up trumps in the 4th and 5th round. He's never won the 3 and then do you know what I mean? He's coming out of adversity. Like you look at the Alexander Gustafsson fight.
Okay.
And he's been in tough situations. He's happy being the nail as well as the hammer. We've seen that from him. Technically, high level, well-rounded striker. Outstruck the best strikers, out-wrestled the best wrestlers. Look what he did to DC. And athletically, his two brothers competed in the Super Bowl. The genetic stock that's there is unreal, like
hit the lottery,
unparalleled. And you hear if you look at interviews of the guys when they fought him, they say how strong he is, even though he doesn't look particularly strong.
Yeah.
He's very well coordinated. His reach is obviously a huge advantage. And conditioning wise, he's always been well conditioned for 5 rounds. It looks like he can always, compete at a good pace. Particularly, you look at the DC fights; they were first one was like a good pace fight the whole time, and he's always, staying in there. So all those three attributes, you're giving him 10 out of 10 on all of them, really.
Right.
And I think the best guys are like that. Whereas I won't name names because I don't want to disrespect anyone. But some guys have had success with just 2 of them. You might be technically good and a fighter, or more often, a lot of guys are really tough and really fit and strong.
Yeah.
And technically not that great.
Okay.
Those guys have a ceiling of where they can get to.
Okay.
And I think having some guys are fighters and athletes. Martial artists and athletes, and they don't have it when they can't be a nail, but they can be happy being a hammer.
Or when the lights shine bright.
Yeah. You get a lot of guys like that, and they like so technical. Those gym guys that are they beat everyone up in the gym, and it comes fight night and they can't do it. So using a slider for them, there are guys that are 2 out of 3, and most people sit within 2 out of 3. And the greats, the GOATs, are all three 10 out of 10. And the point I'm making, though, is that those guys in the NFL, those guys in NBA, if you imagine LeBron James fighting in MMA,
right.
Do you know what I mean? But just because he has those physical attributes, we don't know how tough he is. And that's the hardest one to have. The fighter, I can coach anyone to be technical, okay? That's the easiest one. As a coach, actually, that's the easiest part. But on the athletics side, I was reasonably fast when I played rugby and stuff. I ran 100 in 11 seconds. But no matter, even though I trained and I was doing sprinting, no coach, even the best sprint coach in the world, is going to make me run 10 seconds. It's impossible. It's not in my genetic capabilities.
Okay.
So there are certain things in terms of your strength and conditioning and power, all of those things there's a genetic ceiling to them. And you have to hit the lottery on those things. And I think the best guys have yet to come to the UFC, but the ones that have, they're the GOATs. Look at George St. Pierre, athletic freak.
Yeah.
Khabib, I don't know what his numbers are, but everyone that talks about him says how physically strong he is. Conditioning wise, he weaponizes conditioning, the pace he's able to put and fight people and take them into deep water. And effectively, I hate to say it, you do hit the lottery a little bit on those things. Of course, when you combine that with good coaching, you have success, but you have to have those attributes to be the elite of the sport. And on the fighter side, that's the hardest. So if you're thinking on the spectrum, I'd say the martial artist side is the easiest to develop.
Yeah.
The athlete side, we can always improve good people, but the fighter side, I think that's there's stuff going on there from your childhood. There's stuff like how your parents treated you. There's stuff like your upbringing when you're a teenager, how you react to stress. There's all factors there.
Geopolitical stuff. Yeah.
Like talking about the guys from Mongolia and what they're fighting for. There's those aspects that play into it, which I think are really difficult to quantify, and that really fascinates me in terms of understanding what motivates guys. Like when I'm coaching people, sometimes I've seen a lot of dysfunctional relationships with their dad, and then really close with their mum. Like a lot of fighters are mummy's boys, like look really close to their mum, really protective, and then and a dysfunctional relationship with their dad. That's not all, but I've seen a lot of people that seem to have that, and the way you coach them is like often different. Like some of them they're looking for you to be their dad, and they want that like authoritarian like relationship, and others, if you tell them to do something, they don't want to do it, and you've got to give them a really wide berth, and they don't want that sort of feeling of discipline. And so the coaching is way more than just like, this is how you kick and this is how you punch. You've got to like understand what's motivating them. You've got to understand their why, which is why I have those conversations with them when they join the academy, because that's how you're getting the best out of people. As a coaches, sometimes you can take too much credit for someone's success. Like I always say, don't let the wins go to your head and the losses go to your heart, because you're just there to play a role for them to maximize their potential. You're not the one making them good. They're making themselves good, and you're there to create an environment that allows them to fulfill their potential. And sometimes their potential is hit like there. I know we're all talking audio, so like something not that high, and hopefully you can, as a coach, you can hope to reach their 11 seconds, which is me, or if they can run a 10-second, you're helping them run their 10 seconds, and that's what you're doing as a coach. I don't take too much credit for anything of the success of the athlete. It's just because I personally believe, like, someone like Anderson Silva, it doesn't matter who's coaching him, he's going to be great. It doesn't matter who's coaching John Jones, he's going to be great. Maybe you fulfill that you squeeze the most out of them, and that's what a great coach does, but it's down to the athlete and what they have in them, and the understanding that fighter side is the part that interests me the most, definitely as a coach.
I know that you did touch on it with regards to like the translation elements, etc., but has your style had to change with your role with the PI in terms of a coach? Or I don't want to disrespect what you were doing before, or have you just taken what Dean did in the UK and everywhere else and just plugged it in to the PI, or have you had to go, oh my goodness, this is a different kind of deal?
No, like what I'm doing now at the PI, in my interview, I gave a presentation about what I would do with the PI, and I'm effectively doing that. Obviously, we've added to it with a great team that we have and the input that they've had on how we structured things. But I had a pretty good idea of how I wanted to do things. Now, what I was doing back in England, I wasn't able to do what I wanted to do because, we didn't have a professional team. I couldn't rely on other coaches to do session plans because people just didn't do that. I couldn't rely on even people turning up on time to training and stuff. You know what UK MMA is like, or even just MMA in general. It's like, it's not the most professional thing. Whereas my environment in my experience in other sports where you on time is late. You've got everyone there early, prepared, doing your own warm ups and all of that stuff. And just the level of professionalism, effort that goes into training just wasn't there. So I tried to implement some of that stuff, and then got frustrated with it because of the way things are, and I didn't try to put a round hole in or a square peg into a round hole.
Just culture not ready.
Yeah, well, it was just different, and so I just made the best of what I was trying to do, the best I possibly could, and sprinkle in little things that I think were going to benefit. And sometimes some of that finer stuff, that greater detail comes out in the wash if they're not doing the other stuff. You need it kind of all as a package and all as a program that integrating together. Otherwise, it's kind of like wasted. If you're not doing the basics, then the other stuff doesn't mean anything. So I was kind of like picking my battles at that time, and Ed was a good example. He was pretty good at following what I was getting what I was trying to do, and getting the weight cut right, and all of that stuff. Because sometimes you can do all the best training in the world, for example, and then you have a terrible weight cut, and all that stuff's gone out the window because if you added 5% to your training by training well, then you've lost that by the negative impact of a bad weight cut. So it's a I hate to use the word, but it's like I try to have a holistic approach to MMA preparation and thinking about the factors that contribute to performance.
Yeah, and how do you deal with the emotional side of the wins, the losses, and everything else? Because you've also got what seems like I wouldn't say corporate, but it's a very professional look now with the UFC PI. So I'd imagine you've got a desk job as well as getting on your tracksuit, and then the ups and downs of the emotions of the fight game.
Yeah, no. That's a really good question, mate. It's good insight into what I have to deal with. It is challenging in terms of navigating that sort of, it's not my gym. It's not. I have people to answer to. I have KPIs and all that stuff, which is fine. We're aligned on the goals, but there's still like a corporate sort of influence and picture to think of that is different. If it was just completely my gym, I have to be considerate of that, and that's fine. You have to navigate. That's the nature of professional sport. But I'm happiest on the mat. I'm happiest coaching and getting in there with the guys and training as well when I can. But there's the other side of it that is just the reality of professional sport, and I'm happy to do it. It's just it's part of getting everything that I want in terms of what we have. So it's not even an evil, but like I don't want to say necessary evil, because it's not evil, but it's just part of how it has to be. You can't have one without the other. It's either that or go back to the unprofessionalism. So part of that comes with the sort of corporate side, I guess.
But how do you manage you've got a lot of guys looking up to you now, and from this region there's a responsibility to develop that as well. So how do you take the L's as well? Because you were saying about the head and the heart.
Yeah.
But when you've got so many feeding into you, I always say this to the guys that coach. It really isn't lost on me, because we all look to our coaches for you were talking about it, a father figure, a mentor leader.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's not always what you guys signed up for, but you're having to assume that responsibility.
I really enjoy that part of it. I thrive in that leadership role. I enjoy that. I enjoy that burden, and it's really like gratifying and vindicating when things go right. Like particularly for this year, prior to this year, we've definitely had some challenging results and didn't have things go the way we would have wanted. Like in 2022, for example, that was probably our most challenging year. For those people that don't know, but in China there was a very serious lockdown in 2022. The whole of Shanghai was completely locked down for 2 months, and you weren't allowed to leave your apartment. You had to test your COVID test every single day. You only come down, and you only had, and then government were giving you sending food. You couldn't go to shops or anything like that. It was like a complete lockdown. And the athletes were preparing for the first round of the Road to UFC in that time. They did a month in their dorm. Their dorms are like university dorms, where it's just like a single bed, a little bathroom, and then like a desk. That's all that's in that room. And they were locked in those rooms for a month. And we were sending them videos of like body weight training. They were tying up their mattress so that you could use it as like a punch bag and like rolling it up, and just trying to get creative so they could do some sort of training, because they were preparing for a fight. And then thankfully, because of our connections with the Chinese Olympic Committee, we were able to get those athletes out of China, and we took them to Bali. But that was only 4.5 weeks before the Road to UFC fight. So if you think like normally a fight camp is like longer than that, and they had 4.5 weeks after being in a room for a month.
Oh, goodness.
It was just like terrible preparation. And then they'd come out, because then they'd been in this closed environment, and all got COVID as soon as they arrived. Literally all of them got COVID, and then they were going into those fights in the Road to UFC. Just like in all of my years as a coach, that was the worst prepared I had sent people into a fight. And you talk about actually navigating that corporate thing. That's one of the things that I regret. Maybe they probably shouldn't have fought in those fights, and particularly. There was a couple of losses there, and it was like the whole event. If I was just their coach, and that was my home gym, I wouldn't have put them into those fights. I wouldn't have felt they're prepared enough. It was like too bad a preparation. But the Road to UFC was going on, and if they weren't, those athletes, there was like 6 of them. If they weren't going on, we did get some wins, but in hindsight, particularly with one of them. I probably should have pulled him from the fight, and that was I've learned from that, and that was I put my hands up to that, and maybe I could have given a bit more pushback and been vocal on their behalf to say these guys aren't ready. And then so because of that year we had those losses, and we stayed in Bali that time, and the guys at Bali MMA were fantastic and really helped us in their preparation, but it still wasn't the preparation that they would have had. And then that was Ijar and Ijan Chulun went through to the semi-final, and it was just we were not kicked out. We were out of China, displaced, should we say? With our team, we had 4 support staff there, and then all those guys, and it was just like it wasn't the best environment for those guys to perform. And so that year we really underperformed in terms of our, I guess, KPIs. And the UFC is expecting results. We're investing a lot of money in the PO. You can imagine all the things I've talked about, how much that costs to do, and they want results.
I can't imagine, but
they want results, which I can completely understand. But there was I knew that there was mitigating circumstances that played into it. That the preparation for those guys, as I just talked through, was terrible. And I knew that once the border opened and we've got new coaches now, we've got a guy called Mark Timms from City Kickboxing. He's an incredible striker. That City Kickboxing, we can maybe talk about that later. Their system is just on another level. I've never seen anything like it in terms of striking. Their approach to actually having a system, it's not just like the techniques, the way they put everything together.
Okay.
They're just operating on a different level that I didn't even know existed in striking. And so he's fantastic. We've got Alberto Mina came in as another MMA coach, former UFC fighter, former opponent of mine. And he's been a great addition to the team. And you met Bobo as well, our wrestling coach. Tajeki national level wrestling champ.
Just took a bunch of gold medals on a grappling scene, didn't he?
In Shanghai,
he's a little guy. He embarrassed me.
He's
slick.
High level grappler. And so we've really built out that technical coaching staff. And then when I was saying that we didn't have the results for a reason, to this year to then
and now
go,
we see the results.
We've got this year we've got a 93% win record for the academy.
Wow.
75% finishing rate, and we just had 2 finalists. We had 5 finalists in 4 weight divisions, closed out the featherweight bracket, 1 finalist in each of the other, and hopefully going to get another win. That's the proof is in the pudding, and that's why at that time is like, I believe in the process. I believe we're doing everything. Our program is the best. But we needed the results, and that's why I was just like, I'm gonna be quiet, be patient, and know that nothing's changed from that point to now, other than the fact that those extenuating circumstances that were impacting their performance. When those things were lifted, I knew that the system is one of the best in the world. The way you bring everything together in terms of their support, their training partners, and the way that everything's structured, and I knew that it would come good once those things were lifted. The other thing is that developing talent is not like an overnight thing.
Right.
We opened in 2019, we were there for a year, then we shut for 9 months because of that time that I mentioned, and then we came back, and then in that time when the borders were open, there was me and Richie Walsh, the only technical coaches. A lot of other staff left because they didn't want to come back into that environment, and because of the way they had to do 2 weeks quarantine, they had families out, your family weren't allowed to come, and so I would leave and have extended periods of time out with my family, and then when I come back, Richie would leave and go and spend time with we were understaffed, and that it was like that was also a factor that played into the results. The results, and them not developing as fast as maybe the UFC would have wanted after that investment. And also, these guys that in the road to UFC, Rongju's now 23, Jinyu's 23, Ijar's 26, and Xiaolong's 25. Those guys were like 18 to 20 when we got them. It takes time to develop talent. It's not like an overnight thing. In any other environment, in an academy, whether it be in rugby or football or whatever, those guys don't just come into the first team. If you think of the UFC as a first team coming from the academy, they don't just come in and then be the best, and hold their position from 20 years old. It takes time. So. I knew that. I believed in that. I believed in the system. I believed in myself. Most importantly, I have unwavering self-belief in the effort that I put in, the work that I put in, my approach, my system. I've left there's many ways to skin a cat. But every decision I make in terms of the way that the program is structured, I've thought about it. There's nothing in there that's guesswork. I've thought about it, and whether that is the right decision can always be debated, and we can have different opinions on our approach, but I've thought about every decision that's in there and why we're doing it. There's no that's just because what my coach did. And when I started, there was that, but I had to sort of reverse engineer, especially under the scrutiny of Dunk and Forrest, and why are you doing this and why do you want to do that? I had to think to myself, actually, I think I just do that because my coach did it, and then I had to analyze it, and I did change some stuff. Some of it had a good reason, but it's gone under that lens of scrutiny, and I'm really confident in the system that we have, and I think this year has been, under any circumstances, 93% win record is pretty good, and I'm really, really proud of it and proud of the team, and the work that's gone in there, all of us.
What are you most excited about for MMA coming up in the next year or so?
I think that maybe not the next year or so. I think the sport is just constantly getting better. Like as a product, like you're there every time you're commentating. You must have noticed the level is getting just better and better and better. The more exciting fights. When was the last time you saw? I guess maybe in that co-main event, but you don't often see people spending a whole round on the floor anymore. You know, there was times when your guy might take someone down and they do 3 rounds of control or whatever. You just don't. You rarely see that now.
But they've adjusted the rules and the judging, haven't they?
I think that's great. That's a great decision as well. You need to cause damage and you know, I've had to adapt my coaching off the back of that, and the routes to victory and so on. But I think just the sport is just developing so fast, and these new PIs that are going to be opening, Mexico, I'm really excited about. Like the talent that's going to come out of Mexico is going to be incredible. They're a fighting nation, you know, the boxers are some of my favourite boxers. If we start pulling some of those guys and choosing to go to MMA, you know, I think there's going to be some really great guys to come out of that. The Abu Dhabi one. The one in Africa, if that happens, and the talent that comes from there, I'm really excited about. When we're talking about that fighter, the FMA model, that those well-rounded guys, that the guys from Africa, I'm confident they're going to be great athletes. Technically, obviously, that's the easy part. We're bringing coaches for that, and then fighters. When you're coming from a place that you're trying to bring yourself out of poverty or bring yourself out of challenging circumstances, that's the recipe for greatness. I guess that's the same for Mexico as well. So those guys coming out historically from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, the ones that, you know, have that grit and that mental fortitude to sort of overcome adversity. So that's what I'm most excited about, just the new talent coming from around the world, and then pushing the level up in America, which is obviously the home of MMA. I just can't wait, and I'm so grateful to be involved in the sport, really.
This is a slightly different question. What are you curious about in MMA right now?
Well, I think the rules I still have. I know they're talking about maybe changing the grounded opponent rule.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I'm not sure if I did a good enough job last night, by the way, with the Imavov and Delidze thing.
I haven't heard your commentary yet. I was.
I think I was just I was more confused. So Imavov kicked Delidze middle of the octagon, and he had his hand, and then I think I might be confused because of what recently went on with the Arnold Allen. Evil over the long night, you know, someone in my ear, etc. And also, what blew my mind was Imavov looked round, so he kind of was on his back, and he looked round to see whether Delidze was grounded, and then he came back, and then he went, and then he kicked anyway. So I was like, but you looked. So why did you do the thing? I'm not saying it was on purpose.
I think the point deduction was correct,
but then was he weight bearing? And then I'm confused about how much of the weight bearing.
That's the problem about whether at some places, like whether it's weight bearing or just hand down is down. But I'm of the personal opinion that I think that knees and kicks to the ground should be allowed regardless.
Yeah. Okay.
I think you know, it's not really a safety thing. I think it's an optics thing why they're choosing not to do because
it doesn't look great.
It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't. But it would. The rules are definitely moving towards favouring strikers, you know, with the ground, and then I think that makes it more exciting, and that's fine. You've got to, it's got to be a fight. You can't just, you know, holding people. But in those sprawled positions, if you're able to knee, people aren't just going to hold onto legs in those positions. And I just think that there's nothing like the force involved in Jorge Masvidal's knee to Ben Askren. No grounded strike is as powerful as that. No. He was running at him. The velocity involved. So it's like if a flying knee is allowed, why isn't a knee to the grounded opponent? And if it means if you're worried about danger, the referees just stop it. If you're stuck in that position, I think it would change the sport for the better. I like it, like, you know, not, you know, big up a competitor or anything, but I like the way they have it in one. It doesn't seem to be a problem there. And you've had some, like, you know, the Mighty Mouse knee that he was grounded in that one.
Just thinking of some of those Shogun fights from back in the day.
Yeah, pride. You know,
I do think though
the cage is a little bit thing. If you get stuck in the cage and you're getting maybe like no stomps. I think stomps are not visually good. You don't need a stomp. Maybe let's not have stomps. But a knees to the ground, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I guess coming from a we're not developing still in the UK, but when I'm always, because I feel like obviously I'm very privileged to have like a microphone, a voice in the sport. And every barbecue, it's like you're talking about your sport, etc. And it's brutal, it's this, it's that. Well, I know it's not for everyone, etc., etc. So, I've always looked at some of the rule sets, and you say that it's a great word, isn't it? Optics of what things look like, and it's just if people are hoofing one another in the face. I don't know, but I know that it's a challenge for everyone. So that's interesting. Taken a lot of your time here, but I've still got a couple of things I'd like to ask you about.
I'm doing it, mate.
Who do you really respect, like coaching wise? And by the way, it doesn't have to be just MMA, because I'd like to also maybe get your thoughts on who you're drawing from outside of the sport.
I think like Eric Nixick.
Eric Nixick,
yeah. He's a fact. I mean, he's had I don't know how anyone else could win Coach of the Year other than him last year. He played a part in two of the biggest. I know Ngannou didn't technically beat Fury, but just the fact that fight was competitive. You could give it a round either way, or you could give it a draw. Like the fact that no one's arguing that it wasn't a close fight.
Yeah.
And then the Strickland win, the game planning involved in that was like incredible. That was like that is the perfect fight the way to beat Izzy. I don't know, Strickland has the style to do it, but it still had to be executed.
Sure. And
it still had to be. I thought it was fun. Some of his cornering is always on point. Like he finds the balance of sometimes giving the prompts technically of what they need to be doing in terms of a combination or what they need to be doing, or sometimes it's just like, you need to fucking get out there and fight this guy.
Yeah. We're going all British now, haven't we?
and he seems to get that. Seems to get that on the money actually. And then there's lots though. Like Eric Del Fiero has been a mentor of mine since those days when Ross was training in Alliance. I don't know if this is public knowledge or not.
Hold it down, doesn't matter.
Yeah. But anyway, he's great, and he's a resource for me in terms of bouncing ideas. But then in terms of coaching outside, there's a guy called Franz Ludiker, who I worked with in Japan, the head rugby coach in Japan. He won the Super, which is like the Champions League, twice with the Bulls from South Africa. He's a South African coach. And I credit him a lot for his approach to coaching and the system that I have, and the way that I structure training has come from him. So I've broken down MMA into like 11 technical skill categories.
Okay.
6 of them are from the foundational martial arts, like boxing and wrestling, and so there's striking, offense and defense, wrestling, offense and defense, and then grappling, offense and defense. And then there are another 5 that are unique to MMA that do not come from the foundational martial arts, like punching into takedowns, fence wrestling, offense and defense,
right.
Get-ups, and ground and pound. And so each of those technical skill categories have technical and tactical aspects to them that I have like flow charts of all of those different areas. And so as a fighter, I assess them in terms of using that framework of those 11 technical skill categories to break down where their strengths and weaknesses are. And so it's like an assessment tool to see. And we have a wrestling and grappling test, it's quite difficult to understand. Quite difficult to explain without some visual aids. But the wrestling test, we've chosen the 6 most common takedowns that we know from the statistics, and then the grappling test, we've chosen the 6 most common positions that we know all from the stats, because those stats are kept. So for the grappling, it's mount, guard, front headlock, turtle, back. And I can't remember what I've already said.
Is it like a top half guard or something like that?
No, half guard's not in it because we have half guard as part of guard.
Okay.
I think, did I say back control?
I think you said back, yeah.
Okay. There's 6 of them anyway.
Right.
And then we there's in groups of 3. It's like A, B, and C. So say they start in mount. A goes with B for one minute, and then A goes with C for 1 minute.
Okay.
And then B goes with C, and then B goes with A, and then they all have a go with each other, but we're scoring them both offensively and defensively in those positions.
Right.
But we're not scoring it like jiu-jitsu. The scoring is, so if you get up, you're getting more points for get up rather than a sweep, for example. So we're scoring it in the favour of MMA.
Yes.
And then we do that in all those positions, and at the end it creates like a a plot of their strengths and weaknesses based on the positions.
Right.
And so off the back of that assessment, I'll then the next, say, 6 weeks programming, I know, say for example, someone got, this is keeping it really simple, someone got submitted in front headlock 3 times. That would have been like 15 points against them.
Yeah.
Right, this person needs to work on submission defense from front headlock. In its most simplistic terms, that's how that structure works. And it's the same for the wrestling. So the wrestling positions are in the open, double leg, single leg clinch, and then against the fence, double leg, single leg clinch, because 60% of takedowns happen against the fence. So assessing their ability to defend and offensively, obviously take down as well in those positions. And so once through that, and then a couple of other assessments, we have like their strength and weaknesses across those 11 technical skill categories, and then we program off the back of that. And then off camp we have a weakness focus, and then fight camp is like a strengths focus.
Right.
So what they're working on the game plan, maybe specific to their opponent, but just generally focusing on their strengths rather than developing their
Arsene Wenger way. He used to do that.
Well, really?
Yeah. Focus on the strengths.
Well, there's a lot of like the tactical periodization stuff that Jose Mourinho did as well. That's part of my model as well that I've taken from. But Franz did that for the different positions in rugby. So I don't know how much familiar you are with rugby, but the positions are like really distinct in terms of the skill set that you need to execute those positions. So I'd never seen that in rugby either. Like I played rugby, but no one had ever sat me down and said, in this position I expect you to be able to do this, in this position I expect you to do this. So he had a breakdown of every position, what he wanted them to be able to do, and then those people that played those positions, he assessed those things. Like as a centre, you need to have good passing, you need to have good offloading, or whatever it might be. As a prop, you don't need to offload like in the contact. That's not, I mean, it'd be good if you could, but it's not like a necessary thing to execute your position. So then I used that concept and applied it to the styles. So if you want to fight a particular style, in its most simplistic terms, for the sake of this conversation, if you want to be a striker, you have to have good takedown defense. You don't necessarily need to have good offensive wrestling.
A good double leg.
So what we'd look at where their weaknesses are in their takedown defense. Are they getting taken more down against the fence? And not just like general wrestling defense, like seeing where their strength and weakness. And if we know, now they've got a pretty good sprawl in the open, for the next few weeks, for foreseeable future, obviously he's going to get exposure to sprawling and sparring and stuff. But in terms of the targeted technical work that they do, then we can look at if they seem to get easily taken down with single legs. We know that because objectively we've had that assessment of looking at where their strength and weaknesses are. And so in the timetable, we have a core timetable, which is like normally the morning sessions, and we go over the 11 technical skill categories, no matter what style you are, because I think that everyone has a certain level, no matter what style you are, in all of it. You have to be well-rounded, otherwise you're going to have glaring holes. And then in the afternoon, or there's certain sessions we call swing sessions, which are like electives in college. You know, like you have your core timetable, and then you have electives. So those electives are the things that you work on in those for those weaknesses in off camp. But then when it goes to fight camp, rather than having elective sessions, we have reactive sessions, which are, so we have sparring review. So we have video analysis of all the sessions. So after sparring, we'll go through and make notes and talk with the athlete as well. They give their feedback of things that are positive and negative. And then if they spar on the Wednesday, the Thursday afternoon session will be a sparring review where we go through specifics around things that weren't necessarily working as well. And that's the like reactive process during fight camp. But then when we're in off camp, it's targeted to their weaknesses in those swing sessions. Right. And then in the core timetable, they'll work on the broad sort of not generic, but the broad sort of those 11 technical skill categories. And over a 3-week cycle, within 1 week, I make sure that we cover at least 8 of them. And then across the 3 weeks, like, they're guaranteed to get all 11 in terms of the things that they work on. So I program normally in like a 3-week cycle in terms of session plan, and every session is like has a specific session plan that's like that the coaches work together, and we try to have technical themes for the week as well. This is all in the journal that you can have a look at. It's like inter-technical coordination within the week, so that all the coaches are working aligned to, whether even in a striking session and a grappling session, there's crossover and like references back to the other sessions within the week. And then inter-coordination is across the week. So there's things like connecting across the week. So it's not just random training, because in terms of like skill acquisition, reviewing sessions at appropriate periods of time between the sessions is like the best way of learning.
Right.
So you want like 1 hour. So at the end of the session, you want to review 3 days, 5 days, and then like 10 days. If you can and I program that in, so they're having reviews. So one session might be they do that session, but then in 3 days later, the warm up is a review of the session 3 days ago.
I've heard about it. There's a book called Make It Stick.
Yeah.
Have you heard about that
stuff?
book?
Yeah, so skill, all that stuff, and then using the constraints-led approach to skill acquisition, tying that stuff in as well. There's a book. I forget. Oh damn, I can't remember the name of the book. There's a book that really helped me with that, and they've got really good. There's a graph about the battle against forgetting.
Right.
And it shows how, like, if you don't review something, the difference between performance and learning, the ability to do something doesn't mean you've learned it. Testing it at a later, I can show you something right now, and you can do it. Doesn't mean you've learned that.
No. And 4 weeks gone.
And so planning in review sessions, and sometimes in those review sessions, there's no coaching. It's just like, this is what we did. Go and do it. And the process of trying to recall that without prompting is like better for creating those neural pathways and learning that mental map. And then sometimes you do coach it and we can just go over it again, and then they're getting the cues again, and if they've learned 3 out of 5 things, now they've learned 4 out of 5 things of the details that go into that particular thing. So there's a lot of planning that goes into the way I structure training.
The rest of the world's gonna get left behind. Now I know why I'm so shit at jiu-jitsu. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but like Lachlan Giles, in jiu-jitsu, he does some of this stuff as well.
Does he?
Yeah, he in terms of like the constraints-led approach to coaching. And so these principles are coaching principles that across all sports. It's just the way the brain works and the way we learn. And you're trying to optimize people's development. So like having it targeted in terms of working on strength and weaknesses is beneficial, but then also programming in the appropriate time between sessions is also important for learning, because although the way that we do it in terms of the rote learning way of just like reps, and reps are important, it's a part of the way of learning. It's not necessarily, when you look at the research around skill acquisition, it's not necessarily the optimum way. And I've got like a short amount of period of time where people are expecting results. So I've done a lot of research around the best ways to learn, and I've tried to implement that for MMA. And as I mentioned, Franz Ludiker, he was instrumental in bringing me along that path in technical coaching.
Love it. Before I let you go, I want you to get us excited about a couple of prospects. This is always like putting a coach on the spot here, because you're like, oh no, am I going to remember them? But who is it that you think that we are going to be seeing?
I've got 2 ready for you.
Oh yeah.
So One Song is a female fighter.
Right.
She beat Valentina Shevchenko in kickboxing. Yeah.
How old is she?
She's 30.
Okay.
Yeah, so she's 30, but she joined us at 1-0, and normally we wait for them to be along, but because of her pedigree and the fact that she had fought at such a high level kickboxing, we obviously wanted her, and she has got some special attention more than anyone else because of the potential we see in her, and we see a Alex Pereira sort of level pathway for her, because she is really talented, like so strong. And in terms of holding pads, she's a 125er, but if I had my eyes closed, I wouldn't tell whether it was one of the guys punching or
right.
She cracks. Really technical. On the striking side, I'll be honest, there's not a lot I'm giving her, but it's like putting things together in terms of what we talked about earlier, where we focus on takedown defense, focus on getting back to her feet, focusing on sweeps and unsettling people's base to get back to her feet. And she just beat. Do you remember Wu Yanan? Yeah. She just beat her about 2 weeks ago. And Wu Yanan's no longer in the UFC.
Right. Okay. I thought she's just been.
She just got cut, and that was her first fight after. And One Song just destroyed her.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was like her first test. She's now 5-0.
5-0. Just beat a UFC vet.
Yeah.
Valentina Shevchenko's.
Yeah. And she her mindset. We talk about the fighter side. She's so experienced in terms of competition. But when I speak to her, when I had that entry interview, she was like, "I'm going to be UFC champion. But she really wanted to fight Shevchenko and beat her for the title. So hopefully, in her past, she wants Shevchenko to win the title again and take it off her.
Yeah.
That's what I meant about the Pereira sort of pathway in terms of beating the champ before and coming. And I really think she will be, rightly so, fast-tracked, I would imagine.
125.
At
right.
125. And also, you know, in the women's divisions and just the lighter-weight divisions, I think the path to the title is quicker than say, at lightweight. Lightweight, you're probably 6, 7, 8 fights and people haven't been a title, whereas and the lighter weight divisions and the female divisions, I don't think that the depth there for that, and certainly with their age. But there's also talk, this isn't locked in either, but maybe the Road to UFC next year has a female division.
Right.
And I'd like that for her, because then she's going to get some more into it. She's fought on UAE Warriors and she won there. She beat an Australian girl from Volkanovski's camp, and Volkanovski was actually like in her corner and stuff. So that was already a good win. And then that was her going 4-0. Oh no, so no, she's 4-0. She's 4-0 now. That was her going 3-0, and then she beat Wu Yanan. She's now 4-0. And if she did the Road to UFC, that would take her to 7-0, joining the UFC, Road to UFC champion. That's like a good.
Build her story,
exactly as well. And I think it's
familiarity with the system,
with the system and everything. I don't worry about octagon jitters or anything with her. She's bulletproof in terms of her mindset, but just experience-wise, exposure to different styles, I'd like it. And I think then once you win it, like I could see the the Japanese guy. Forgive me for forgetting his name. Who won the Road to UFC at bantamweight?
Oh no! Why have you done this to me? I was his biggest cheerleader, the wrestler guy.
Yeah, but he's striker, man. He's got knockouts.
Oh my God, Rinya Nakamura.
Yes,
he's special.
He's special. So he's another one that you can imagine him not fast tracking, but certainly getting within the rankings relatively soon. And yeah, so but bantamweight is a murderer's row, so maybe
isn't it?
Yeah, but. She is the one to look out for from China. And
you said you had two.
Two, yeah. So the other is Agolali, the guy who's 18 that I mentioned earlier.
Agolali.
We nicknamed him Agolalaway because he's like Holloway.
Oh, very good. Does he fight like Holloway?
Yeah,
he does.
He does. He's
what a compliment.
He's a flyweight. He's tall for the weight. He just beat that Russian guy that. He's now. He's like. 9-1 or something.
Right.
18 years old, just so well rounded. Like I think when being 18 and that well rounded and that experienced already. We're gonna take our time with him. We're not gonna rush him with anything. We have no ambitions of him being one of the youngest guys in the UFC or anything. But
just gonna enjoy creating
and his learning ability. Is like scary. His ability to show him something and then to try it, just fearless, just try it in sparring the next day. Like doesn't matter whether it's going to work or not. He just tries it, and that's the type of attitude you want as a coach. He's not bound by understanding how difficult things are. Do you know what I mean? He's just so young and free and loves it. He great training attitude as well, and already levels wise gives Jinyu and Chulun like good rounds. He's also from Embo, as I mentioned. He's a real prospect. And there's actually one more, but he's a bit earlier before. It's Rongju's brother. He's 17. He's not actually part of the academy yet, but sometimes he comes and trains because we got an eye on him and we know there's a future prospect. But we'll wait and see with him. But he's definitely got a lot of talent. He's only I think 2-0, so. A bit early to say with him. But on the spectrum, I'd say one song we're going to see in the UFC like real soon. Aglali like a couple of years, and Rongju's we just call him Mini Rongju. He's a little bit further away, but like definitely a prospect. And there's more coming through. Like it's really exciting. The younger guys that are coming through, and we're getting our hands on them and coming through that process. It's really exciting.
I love it. We're never going to do your career justice in this time. Have I left a big gaping hole anywhere?
No, I don't think so. I think
we covered some good stuff.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
On, mate. I appreciate it.
It's really fascinating, and I think there's a few people out there that I'm going to share that document with. I think it's really encouraging.
I'll send you the link to download it as well, because then you maybe if whatever this goes out on, you could maybe have the link on it. I'll share that with you. It's like from the PI website. You just download it. And it's good.
It's great. Thank you very much. Safe travels home.
Yeah, thank you.